Sunny landed on the very edge of the island and froze there, looking forward with a dark expression on his bestial face. The others remained silent, too, feeling his unease and tension. The land in front of them seemed tranquil, beautiful even. There was an expanse of vibrant green grass, and some distance away, it made way for the calm waters of a vast lake. Its surface was perfectly still and reflective, making it seem as though a piece of the blue sky above had somehow gotten embedded into the ground. A gentle wind caressed their faces, and nothing broke the peaceful silence except for the rustle of grass and the distant rattling of chains. And yet, Sunny couldn't help but feel a sense of imminent danger. He sighed, and then glanced at his friends with uncertainty.
Should we summon our armor and weapons?
Kai hesitated for a moment, then said,
Wouldn't that be seen as a sign of distrust and hostility? Pure heart, pure thoughts, whatever that means, does not seem to fit with being armed and ready for a fight.
Sunny grimaced and muttered, Yeah, however, what if we do have to fight? Effie smiled and said, The four of us should be able to at least retreat safely should things go wrong. I mean, how terrible can that thing be? Sunny shivered, then shook his head.
Terrible enough for saints to fear it. I've been to this island a few times in the future, but stuck to the edges, never approaching the lake, so I don't actually know what kind of a creature lives in its depths. However, I did see bones laying on the shore, and just those bones alone looked like they had belonged to things I would not want to meet.
He hesitated for a while, then glanced at Cassie and asked, What do you think? The young woman tilted her head a little, then said calmly,
I don't feel any danger. Maybe Noctis was honest this time.
Sunny sighed. Cassie's intuition had guided each of them through countless dangers unscathed. If she felt that it was safe, there was a good reason to listen. That didn't mean that he had to be happy about it, though. He conceded, All right, no weapons or armor for now, just pure thoughts. Together, they crossed the stretch of land between the edge of the island and the shore of the lake, stopping just a few steps away from the calm water. Because of how still and reflective it was, no one could peer beneath the surface. However, Sunny could feel something deep beneath the water, a vast and sprawling shadow, ancient, deep, unfathomable. He shivered. Sunny lingered for a bit, then cleared his throat and, feeling extremely stupid, addressed the lake.
I am here to retrieve the ruby knife. Please, give it to me.
There was a gust of wind, and nothing happened. Sunny ventured, Is it because of Harper, or all the things I've done to survive in the outskirts? A few moments later, Effie laughed and teased, Oh, I guess you are not pure, Sunny. Who would have thought? He gritted his teeth, then growled at her angrily and snapped, Go and try yourself then. The little girl shook her head vigorously and protested, No one has ever accused me of being pure, I think, although. She thought for a bit and then shrugged, adding, I guess I am in the body of a child. The girl climbed down from Sunny's shoulders, approached the water, and stretched out a hand, calling out, Can I please have the knife, Auntie from the lake? Once again, nothing happened. Effie remained there for a few moments, then sighed and took a step back, muttering, Figures. Finally, both of them turned and stared at Kai. The young man hesitated for a few moments, then shook his head and suggested, I think Cassie should try. Sunny and Effie glanced at each other, a little surprised, then shrugged and made way for the blind girl to approach the water. There was no harm in trying anyway. Cassie lingered for a few moments, then sighed and walked toward the shore. Stopping mere centimeters from the calm water, she lowered her head and said simply,
I am here for the ruby knife.
At first, Sunny thought that she had failed as well. But then, the young woman suddenly paled and took a step back. There was a ripple on the surface of the lake, and although the vast shadow hidden within it did not move, something suddenly appeared from beneath the water. A pale white hand that held a long knife which seemed to be made of solidified blood. The hand rose from the water and offered it to Cassie, who suddenly trembled with her whole body and took another step back, shaking her head with a panicked look. Then, however, she stopped. Her bloodless lips turned into a straight line, and gritting her teeth, the young woman returned to the shore. There she knelt and leaned forward, taking the ruby knife from the deathly white hand. The hand let go of it easily and disappeared back into the water, and soon nothing but a slowly dissipating ripple remained to remind them of its existence. Sunny observed all of this in shock and breathed. It didn't move. The shadow did not even move. He was about to say something, but then the water rippled again and another hand emerged. This one black as coal and holding nothing. It slowly moved toward Cassie, then rose and softly caressed her cheek. The young woman flinched when the black flesh touched her, but remained in place. A few seconds later, the black hand retreated back into the lake as well. Cassie only moved when the ripples were gone, standing up and turning to them with a distant expression on her beautiful face. In the spot where the black hand touched her cheek, her skin turned gray and opened, drops of blood rolling down her chin. She was holding the ruby knife in her trembling hands. Sunny finally found himself able to speak and demanded, What the hell was that?" Cassie remained motionless for a while, then suddenly shivered and whispered, I don't know, let's just get out of here, please." He frowned but did not object. To tell the truth, Sunny couldn't wait to get away from the lake himself. As they were walking away, he briefly turned and looked at the tranquil water one last time. Was it an illusion, or did the reflection of the sky on its surface seemed darker? As they were walking back across the chains, he looked at Kai and asked, a bit of curiosity finding its way into his voice.
How did you know that it will give the knife to Cassie?
The blind girl turned her head slightly, as if equally interested to hear the answer. Even Effie seemed stumped. The young man glanced at them and shrugged, smiling beneath his wooden mask.
Pure heart, pure thoughts. All of us wondered what that means, right? Well, I think we all made a mistake because it didn't really matter how we understood it. The only thing that mattered was how Noctis had understood it, centuries ago, when he entrusted the knife to the creature.
He grew silent for a bit, and then added,
He gave the ruby knife away after finding out that Hope was driving the chain lords mad, fearing what he might do with it should the worst happen. So, to him, purity of heart and thought meant something very specific, the ability to remain of clear mind, true to his oath, and loyal to his sacred duty. And while none of us is perfect, Cassie is the most clear-headed and dutiful person I know.
Sunny tilted his head, not sure if he agreed with that statement. The creature of the lake had, though, which meant that Kai was at least partially right. Or it had all been just a coincidence. As he was remembering the past with a dark expression on his face, the young man suddenly spoke again, his voice hoarse and somber.
That was why Noctis had sent us to retrieve the knife instead of coming himself, I guess, because he has gone mad, betrayed his oath, and abandoned his duty. And we are helping him walk even further on that path, walk further into the madness until he reaches its end.
If Kai reading the knife's riddle like Noctis intended hooked you, hit like on this episode so more people find the story. Now back to the chapter. The journey back was sadly uneventful. Sunny had hoped that they would stumble upon a few nightmare creatures, but this close to the sanctuary, there weren't many except for those too powerful for the cohort to attack without a serious reason and thorough preparations. Come to think, these powerful abominations were probably the reason why the weaker ones kept away. Perhaps that was why Noctis had not eradicated them. Well, that, or he was simply too lazy. They returned to the sorcerer's stronghold at dawn and went to find him without wasting any time. However, Noctis was not at his residence, and the wooden door remained shut. Eventually, they located him at the far side of the island where the immortal was, making a statue. There were several giant slabs of marble laying on the ground, and a dozen or so chisels hacking at them without anyone's help. The sorcerer stood some distance away, his luscious black hair powdered by marble dust, and watched it all with a satisfied expression on his face while sipping from a glass of wine. The first of the statues seemed to be close to completion and resembled something. It might have been a human or a horse. Sunny found it hard to tell. Noticing them, Noctis grinned and called out, "Oh, you're back." Then he looked at the hideous stone abomination and raised his chin proudly, asking, "What do you think? Majestic, right?" Sunny hesitated for a few moments, and then said cautiously,
That is one word to describe it without a doubt, but what is it?
The sorcerer frowned with confusion.
What do you mean? It's me. A monument to me, that is. I have decided to grace the generations to come with a vision of my matchless beauty. They deserve the privilege of witnessing it as well. Who am I to devoid people of such blessing?
He glanced at the terrifying marble monster, scratched the back of his head, and added,
Of course, I might have failed to grasp a couple of nuances of the sculpting art just yet. This one is really not too bad, but it is just the first attempt. Luckily, I have plenty of these slabs to practice. 7 should be enough to reach perfection. Well, maybe 14 or 20.
Sunny stared at the hideous statue for a bit, quite sure that it looked more like a monstrous gargoyle than Noctis. Then he shook his head and said,
Good for you. Meanwhile, we have retrieved the ruby knife, so what comes next?
The sorcerer remained silent for a while, then sighed despondently.
I guess it's time to take a break. Come, let's have something to eat, and drink, of course, and discuss the future. Now that the knives are in our possession, the future will surely be upon us soon enough.
Sometime later, they were enjoying a light breakfast in the shade of the ancient tree that grew in the heart of the sanctuary. Noctis poured himself some wine, then offered them a polite smile and remarked, "You must be curious about what happens next." The 4 of them glanced at each other, then nodded. The sorcerer shrugged.
Well, to be honest, nothing much. By now, the other chain lords already know that I am collecting the knives. The death of the one in the north would have distracted them for a bit, but at the same time, it would have made my actions look much more suspicious. So, they will hold a council and decide how to act.
He took a sip of wine and smiled.
However, getting Solvin and Severus into one room is not an easy task. It will take them some time to come together. After that, predictably, they will send a herald to give me some sort of an ultimatum. And only then, after their polite request is denied, will they act, joining forces to invade my lands, capture me, and make me bitterly regret the fact I am immortal.
Noctis shook his head, then laughed. Sunny, on the other hand, shivered and asked, his voice full of tension,
Is this really something to laugh about? How are we going to repel an attack of 3 transcendents?
The sorcerer grew silent, then shook his head.
Ah well, simple really, we won't.
He took another sip of wine and looked up, at the flying ship that hovered above them.
Instead, we will attack them first. We will lay siege to the Ivory City.
Noticing their stunned gazes, Noctis laughed again.
Ah, children, you are so fun to talk to. These expressions are priceless. However, even younglings like you should have learned by now that having more power doesn't always mean achieving victory. The 3 lords that oppose us are very powerful indeed, but they are not without weaknesses.
He paused and then looked at them, his eyes glinting with a hint of moonlight.
To tell you the truth, neither Solvin nor the Sun Prince concern me that much. The only one worth being scared of, the only one who can defeat me, is Severus, the Ivory Lord, that dreadful dragon. Because between all 7 of the chain lords, only he and I belong to divine bloodlines. Only the 2 of us trace our lineage to gods.
Sunny frowned.
Wait, aren't Severus and the Sun Prince brothers? How come he is the only one with a divine lineage?
Noctis shrugged.
All kinds of strange things happen when it comes to gods. Who knows? In any case, he is the only brother who inherited the fire, and he is formidable for it beyond words. So we won't be able to defeat Severus unless we strike at his flaw.
Sunny froze and asked, "You know his flaw?" The sorcerer smiled gingerly, then chuckled.
Of course, we immortals spent more than 1,000 years bound together. I know all of their flaws and they know mine, but Severus, that guy is rather special. In a sense, he actually has 3.
Noctis grew silent for a few moments, taking a sip from his glass. Then he sighed and said with a hint of sadness,
One is his actual flaw, the other is his brother, and the last one, the direst of them all, is his city.
He looked at the beautiful garden of the sanctuary, his face turning cold and ruthless.
By using all 3, we will destroy him.
No one dared to speak for a few moments, unnerved by the sudden change in the sorcerer's mood. After a while, though, Effie tugged on his sleeve and asked,
You care to elaborate, Grandpa Noctis?
Noctis looked at her absent-mindedly, then flinched and jerked his sleeve away, wiping the spot where the little girl touched it with a repulsed look.
Gee, Grandpa, who are you calling a grandpa, you critter?
He moved his chair away from Effie and stared at her menacingly for a moment, then threw a hurt look at Sonny. Sonny shrugged and remarked, You are 1,000 years older than her. The sorcerer opened his mouth with a deeply offended expression, then puffed and looked away. After a long and poignant pause, he continued.
Anyway, as I was saying, Severus has 3 weaknesses. The first one is his flaw. He is incredibly powerful during the day, but nearly powerless during the night. The second one is his brother. Surprising, I know, considering what he did to the poor guy. But the Ivory Lord still genuinely cares about his younger sibling. In fact, that is probably the only thing he cares about anymore, apart from his duty and principles.
Noctis grew quiet for a moment, and then added in a somber tone.
And the third one is his city. That Severus loves his people, but he also hates them. They are a burden that weighs heavily on his soul, one that he cannot escape. Their relationship had long been perverted by Hopper and by his own stubborn unwillingness to give up. Noble, righteous Severus. He might seem like the sanest among us, but in reality, he is the closest to utter madness. All it will take to send him over the edge is one push.
The immortal transcendent sighed, then shook his head reproachfully.
That guy, truly, he has always been too serious. You can't survive in this place without a sense of humor, even if you are immortal.
The sorcerer giggled at his own joke, and then looked at them with a relaxed smile.
So, we will attack at night, when the ivory dragon Severax is at his weakest. And we will kill his younger brother before dawn. That will be the push that sends him into the abyss and dooms him.
Sonny shivered, looked at the immortal transcendent, and asked cautiously,
Is it wise to drive a dragon insane?
Hearing this, Noctis simply laughed.
Of course, Severus the Ivory Lord is fearsome and dreadful, but Severax the dragon is just a mindless beast. Killing a beast is not too difficult for a cunning hunter. And while I might not be as righteous and as noble as Severus,
His smile disappeared, and his eyes suddenly shone with pale light.
I am blood of the moon, beast god, the god of hunters.
With that, the sorcerer leaned back and took a sip of his wine, slowly returning to his usual carefree self.
Granted, I have not hunted for a while. The wilderness is just so ghastly, you know. The dirt, the insects, the fashion. Oh, the horror.
He sighed heavily and then smiled again. Sonny hesitated for a bit. There was a question that he really wanted to ask, but was not sure that he should. Finally, he said,
What is your flaw then? I know that it is not the kind of question people ask or answer, but our lives will be depending on your fight with the dragon. I think we have the right to know.
Noctis waved his hand dismissively.
Oh, it's nothing much. More or less the exact opposite of his. I am at my strongest under the moonlight, but grow weak in the sunlight. No reason to hide it from friends.
He thought for a bit and then added,
Solven's flaw is perhaps the most cruel. She is cursed with beguiling beauty, Being with her slowly drives people mad with longing and lust like an insidious drug. The more someone spends time with her, the more they want to possess her, eventually giving in to irresistible desire. A terrible fate, no doubt, but not exactly something we can use, unless, of course, one of you. No, let's not think about that.
Noctis grinned, then shook his head.
The Sun Prince's flaw, well, it doesn't matter anymore. Now that he is encased in that steel monstrosity and almost mindless, we won't be able to make use of it anyway. We will just have to kill him in a straightforward manner. So, do you guys have questions?
The four of them looked at each other, and after a long pause, Kai asked hoarsely,
Yes, Lord Noctis, just one. When we attack the Ivory City at night, and you are fighting the Sun Prince and Solvin, what exactly are we four supposed to do?
The sorcerer stared at them in confusion, then raised an eyebrow.
Why is it not clear? While I am preoccupied with the Chain Lords, you will simply have to destroy the Sun Legion and the army of the Red Colosseum.
He thought for a bit, and then added,
Well, if you somehow fail to destroy them, at least keep them away from me for a while. Solvin and the Sun Prince. Yeah, shouldn't take me too long. I think you will manage.
At the precipice of night, Sunny came to the edge of the island alone and stood there for a while, shrouded in shadows. Now that things were nearing the final stage, there was a lot he had to think about. There was the seemingly insane plan of attacking the Ivory City, the battle the cohort was going to wage against two armies while saints fought in the skies above them. And then there was Mordred, who remained an unknown variable in this whole mess. What concerned him the most, however, was his unformed fourth core. Going into the dire battle as a devil would have been far better. What's more, he couldn't allow himself to undergo the debilitating process of forming a new core in the midst of the furious clash. With the culmination of the nightmare swiftly approaching, he had no more time left to slowly seek out and kill nightmare creatures, and so Sunny was forced to do something that he had always been reluctant to do. With a sign, he summoned his shadows. The taciturn knight, the Stygian steed, and the tenebrous serpent appeared in front of him, their figures drowning in the darkness. Two of his shadows slid forward and wrapped themselves around Nightmare and the Soul Serpent, with only the gloomy one remaining at his feet. Sunny lingered for a bit and then said,
Go, travel far and wide, seek out nightmare creatures, and kill them. I need you to hunt for me instead of with me for a while.
He paused and then added somberly,
Be careful, however, this world is a dangerous place. No matter how strong you are, how powerful you are, there is always someone or something far stronger, especially when you are alone, so don't let yourself get destroyed, all right?
Saint stared at him for a few moments, then outstretched a hand. After he placed the hilt of the scarlet Odachi in it, she silently turned around and jumped down, landing on the links of the heavenly chain far below. Nightmare and the Soul Serpent dashed in opposite directions, soon disappearing from view. Just like that, Sunny was left alone. He remained motionless for a few moments, then sighed and looked down at the gloomy shadow.
I guess it's just you and me again, like good old times, huh?
The shadow stared at him darkly for a second, and then raised a hand, clearly unsure what good times he was talking about exactly. Sunny smiled and murmured, Yeah, love you too, buddy. Soon after the shadows left, the connection Sunny shared with them grew faint. He could still feel their existence, but not much beyond that. The same happened with the happy and creepy shadows. When Nightmare and the Soul Serpent left the range of shadow control, which had grown to about 4 kilometers, he lost the ability to perceive them and the world through them. Sunny felt that they were out there somewhere, but that was it. The sudden loss of being able to see and hear through 2 out of his 3 shadows was abrupt and jarring, as though he had suddenly lost an eye and a limb. It made Sunny feel very uncomfortable. Not only was his power severely diminished in the absence of his loyal companions, making him extremely vulnerable, but he also worried about them. There had been many opportunities to send Saint away to hunt on her own in the past, but Sunny never did. The risk was just too high. Both for the shadow and for himself, they were stronger together. Shadows were not meant to be apart from their master, but there was no other choice now. He did not know when the three chain lords were going to act exactly, but there was not much time left before. Before the final confrontation began, Sunny had to become a devil. Neff was already a tyrant after all. It would not do to let her remain so far ahead. With a sigh, he turned around and walked back to his room. The gloomy shadow followed, trying to not show that it, too, missed its siblings. The shadows were gone, but there was still a lot Sunny had to do. He had to prepare himself for the battle, both mentally and physically. The next few days passed without too much happening. Sunny trained archery with Kai, practiced swordsmanship with Cassie, and sharpened his mastery of the spear with Effie's help. The other three were busy with their own preparations as well. From time to time, all four left the sanctuary to hunt and put their teamwork to the test. Sunny received a few fragments from those small expeditions as well. In the night, he continued to experiment with weaving. However, he was also careful to get enough sleep. It would not do to go into the final battle exhausted. After several days of this, while Sunny was laying in bed, the spell suddenly whispered into his ear.
You have slain a fallen monster, veiled slayer. Your shadow grows stronger.
Sunny sat up and stared into the darkness, tense. So one of them had found a prey. He did not know which one it was, saint, serpent, or nightmare, or even if they were wounded in the fight. All he knew was that one of his shadows had emerged victorious and was not destroyed. After that first kill, the shadow fragments started to pour into his soul frequently, making the goal of forming a new core before the fateful clash seem less hopeless. In the meantime, all Sunny could do was carry on. 2 weeks of practicing weaving later, he could proudly say that he had successfully managed to destroy 38 out of the 39 memories received in the Red Colosseum. The only one remaining was the emerald bone flute. However, that saved him from damaging his actual memories at least. After the initial success of transplanting enchantments, Sunny found out that it was not as easy as he had thought. Well, it had never really been easy, but now. He realized that there were more things he had to consider than simply the pattern of the weave itself. Each memory had a certain capacity when it came to accommodating enchantments. The more powerful an enchantment was, the more burden it put on the weave. To withstand it, weaves needed to be moored to anchors, each serving as a nexus for the strings of essence. Sunny created those anchors from soul shards. The more he used, the higher the tier of the memory was, and the higher its capacity. However, the rank of the shards also played a role, albeit in a slightly different manner. Apart from capacity, weaves also had a threshold of intensity they could withstand. More powerful enchantments put too much strain on the strings and the anchors, and so, both the strings and the anchors had to be of a high enough rank to endure it. Additionally, only the weakest of enchantments could be activated passively, relying on the memory's own ambient soul energy. Everything else would only function when saturated by the flow of essence from the wielder's soul. But that was not all. Sunny had found out the hard way that not all memories could accommodate all enchantments, regardless of whether they had enough capacity and tolerance. Some were simply not meant for each other. He suspected that the name of the memory, and therefore its nature, played a role in that. He had transferred the sonorous enchantments to the silver bell and the ordinary rock, and also made the ordinary rock, which had been able to repeat the sounds it heard, repeat the words Sunny thought of as well. Both of these changes improved upon the original qualities of the memories, instead of introducing something entirely new. They were not in conflict with their natures. However, when he tried to do something more radical, the results were disastrous. He could not add an enchantment meant to destroy to a memory that was meant to protect, unless he wanted the whole weave to break apart. It was not easy to understand the true nature of memories, however. The Patient Avenger, for example, was a shield, and its purpose was to protect its master. And yet, that shield possessed enchantments capable of sowing utter devastation on the battlefield. So, it took Sunny a lot of time, and a lot of wasted memories, to get an initial grasp on the nuances of what enchantments he could transfer, and where. The hint was under his nose the whole time. The name of the memory hid the secret of its nature. He was still unable to fully grasp it, but after destroying dozens of memories, Sonny managed to develop an intuitive sense that allowed him to glean the general direction of things at least. It was not much, but it was something. At the start of their 5th month in the nightmare, Sonny found himself on a somewhat familiar island. Some distance away from him, a forest of tall trees stood, darkness nesting between their trunks. The forest looked different from how it had been in the future. There, the trees were twisted and bent, their bark turned dark and rough. But here, they had no need to change and adapt to the devastating burden of the crushing yet. And so, the forest stood tall. The wolves, however, were more or less the same. The nightmare creature lunging at him was the size of a small truck, with fur as tough as steel wire and a long, terrifying muzzle. Its jaws were wide enough to bite a human in half, and strong enough to crush both bones and armor into dust. As the giant beast jumped at him, Sonny dodged left and allowed Effie to barrel into the creature, her fist sending it flying to the ground with a whimper. A second later, an arrow landed from above, piercing one of the wolf's paws and nailing it to the ground. A slender rapier flashed through the air, doing the same with another. Effie appeared near the wolf, pressing it down with all her inhuman strength, and shouted,
Come on, the bastard is strong, are really strong.
Sonny did not make them wait. Jumping forward, he brandished the cruel sight and buried it between the abomination's 6 glowing eyes. Almost instantly, the flame of madness burning in them dimmed and then was extinguished. Sonny sighed as the spell whispered,
You have slain a fallen monster, dread wolf. Your shadow grows stronger.
He did not need the help of the cohort to slay a dread wolf, of course. These vile beasts were easy prey for someone like him. He did, however, require their assistance for what was about to happen next. Summoning the runes, Sonny found the familiar string of them. The runes read, Shadow Fragments, 3000, 3000. He prepared himself, and a moment later, the voice of the spell resounded once again.
Your shadow is overflowing with power.
It was time for him to become a devil. Sonny sighed, then dismissed the runes, feeling the familiar heat igniting deep within his soul, growing stronger and stronger with each breath. Effie and Kai looked at him, curiosity and concern mixing in their eyes. Cassie silently retrieved the quiet dancer and turned away, listening to the dark forest that surrounded them. A few moments later, the little girl asked,
So, what exactly happens now?
Sonny gave her a grim look.
Now I will scream and thrash for a while. Forming a new core is probably the 3rd worst pain I have ever experienced. And that was just the demon core. Damnation.
Effie blinked a couple of times.
What are the 2nd and the absolute worst, then?
He hesitated for a bit, and then said hoarsely,
Attaining a demon's lineage was pretty bad, but the most terrible thing, by far, was catching a glimpse of fate. That one I only survived by accident.
The gloomy shadow shivered, remembering their past. Sonny, meanwhile, scoffed and remarked, Being gutted by the Black Knight did not even make the list. Maybe I need to rethink my life choices. At that moment, the heat burning within his soul reached a critical point, and the spell whispered into his ear.
Your shadow is taking shape.
A blinding pain exploded in his chest, sending Sonny to his knees. He gritted his teeth and remained silent, refusing to let out a shriek, a wail, or even a growl. This was not his first time experiencing that pain, even though this time it was far more intense. A human soul was not meant to contain many cores. That was the conclusion Sonny had come to a while back, thinking about how the process of awakening was pleasant and euphoric, but gaining new cores and a demon's lineage was harrowing and torturous. Humans were meant to walk the path of ascension, but becoming a different type of creature was against their nature, and Weaver's lineage was simply against all nature. It was aberrant and forbidden, something that was never meant to exist at all. The pain grew stronger and stronger and then stronger still. Just like before, he felt as though his soul was being torn apart. something rising from its depths and cutting his very being with its sharp edges. However, Sonny was used to this torment. He accepted it, allowed himself to dissipate into it, and endured. However, then something entirely unexpected happened. As his soul was going through a transformation, his body followed suit as well, catching him by surprise. This time, Sonny failed to suppress a scream and fell to the ground in convulsions. Effie and Kai stared at him with worry as he cursed. "Curse it! What the hell?" It felt as though his bones were breaking, his muscles were tearing, and his skin was on fire. Sonny clawed at the ground, then raised his head and let out a deafening, furious roar. As it rolled across the forest, the roar changed, growing lower and more frightening. Finally, an eternity later, the heat consuming his soul grew cold, and his tortured body was released from the cage of suffering. Sonny exhaled hoarsely, then relaxed and remained laying on the grass motionless. The voice of the spell resounded from the darkness, echoing between the ancient trees.
Your shadow is complete.
And a few moments later, he heard another voice, this one soft and childish.
God damn, he is even bigger now.
Sonny slowly stood up, intending to take a look at his runes. However, even before that, he noticed that something was different. The ground was considerably further down than it had been before. Sonny let out a confused sound. Effie and Kai were staring at him, forgetting their task of watching out for a potential attack. Luckily, Cassie was still vigilant. Sonny frowned, then glanced down to take a look at his own body as well. It seemed that because he was in a body of a creature, the transformation into a devil changed it too. The shadow demon, devil, grew even taller, now standing at almost 3 meters of height. His skin had turned into a darker shade of gray, and his claws seemed as though they were cut out of glossy morion. Through the eyes of his shadow, Sonny could see that his horns had grown longer and sharper as well. More than that, there were now 4 of them. Well, 3.5. Considering that one had been broken in the ferocious fight with the ascended war maiden Hilda, and his eyes, which had been entirely black previously, now seemed like 2 pools of eerie darkness. The shadow spawn had been fearsome before, but now he was simply terrifying. Even Sonny himself would not have been happy to meet this towering fiend on a moonless night. Effie shook his head, then looked away and grumbled, "My neck hurts from staring at you. Is this how everyone feels when they're talking to me?" Kai hesitated, then smiled slightly and offered, "Well, that is presuming that they are looking at your face." The little girl snorted and shot back, "Wow, good one. You've been hanging out with Sonny way too much, it seems. Or with me." Ignoring her jabs, Sonny curiously looked at the ground. He had gained a new shadow after all. What would its personality be? 2 identical shadows of a 4-armed devil were there, staring at each other. Nevertheless, to Sonny, they seemed very different. One was gloomy and glowering, full of bad mood and disdain. The other was also full of disdain, but of another kind. The new guy somehow managed to seem noble and gallant despite being the exact copy of the other shadow, looking at it with arrogant contempt. They were of the exact same height, and yet haughty shadow somehow made it seem as though it was looking down at the gloomy one, and everyone else for that matter. Back when the creepy shadow appeared, it lost the staring contest to the gloomy shadow. The haughty shadow, however, did not seem impressed even a little bit. It was as though the very thought of looking away was beneath it. So the 2 of them just continued to drill holes into each other with disdainful stares, unperturbed. Sonny groaned, then covered his face with a hand and groaned, "Oh. Gods, there's 2 of them now." Observing the staring contest, Sonny sighed. He was beginning to miss the happy shadow, that hopeless fool, something that had never thought he would ever feel. Shaking his head, Sonny looked away from the shadows and summoned the runes. The familiar symbols shimmered in the air in front of him.
Name sunless, true name lost from light. Rank awakened, class devil, shadow cores 4-7, shadow fragments 0-4000.
A tired but satisfied smile appeared on his lips. With a 4th core, his power would increase significantly. His essence reserves had grown, the range of shadow control had expanded, and most importantly, he now had an additional shadow to augment either himself, his memories, or his shadows. He could increase his physical prowess fivefold, or send one each to Saint, Serpent, and Nightmare while leaving one for himself. And that was not all. The Soul Serpent evolved its class when Sunny did. So it should have become a devil as well. That would make it the most powerful, at least in terms of pure status, shadow of his. Not wasting any time, Sunny summoned the serpent's runes. Somewhat tense, he read.
Shadow Soul Serpent, Shadow Rank Ascended, Shadow Class Devil, Shadow Attributes, Shadow Guide, Soul Weapon, Soul Beast.
Sunny was both glad and worried. Glad because his shadow had attained a new class, but worried because he did not see any new attributes. The transformation to a devil was supposed to gift creatures terrible and unnatural powers. However, the serpent was a bit strange in that regard. It had received a new ability out of order when rising to a new rank. So would it receive anything now? Luckily, he was wrong to fear. Looking lower, Sunny saw few new runes among the serpent's abilities.
Shadow Abilities, Serpentine Steel, Soul Reaver, Grace of Shadows, Formless.
The formless one was new. Sunny concentrated on it and studied the description curiously. A moment later, a strange sound escaped from his lips. The runes read.
Formless Ability Description. When in the Soul Beast form, the serpent can assume the shape of any shadow contained within its master's soul, inheriting all powers and abilities. The shadow must be of the same or lower rank and class than the Soul Serpent for the transformation to take place, and won't be consumed in the process.
Soon after settling into his new and improved body, Sunny dismissed his shadows. He expected them to instantly return to his cores, but this time, there was a delay. It seemed that he had to wait for some time before Saint Nightmare and the Soul Serpent returned. And then there were the happy and the creepy shadows. Poor guys were going to have to come back the usual way by gliding across the Kingdom of Hope one island at a time. They were swift and sneaky, so Sunny was not too worried about them. He also knew that the shadows always sensed in which direction to go to return to their master. Sunny had gained this bit of knowledge a while back, when his experiments with Shadow Step left the gloomy guy outside of the range of shadow control. The shadow had swiftly returned, acting even more petulant and moody than usual. Its mood had only grown worse when Sunny decided to try and repeat the accident a few more times, just to make sure. But as the result, he learned that once separated from him, the shadows would always try to find their way back to their master, somehow sensing where he was. And speaking of shadows, the haughty newcomer was still acting cavalier, radiating a disdainful certainty that it was, without a doubt, better and more distinguished than everyone and everything in every way imaginable. Sunny shook his head and silently commanded the haughty shadow to wrap itself around his body, which it did, but not before giving him a look that clearly expressed how utterly beneath itself the arrogant guy considered such a trivial task to be. The members of the cohort had already collected the soul shards from the slain abominations, so there was nothing holding them on the island anymore. They started the journey back to the sanctuary and returned to it at dusk. On the way, Sunny was trying to get used to his new physique. Sure, the shadow spawn had grown taller and more powerful, but as a side effect of that, he had to relearn how to move in this towering body all over again. The shock was not as dire as when he had first appeared in the nightmare, but it would still require some time for Sunny to be able to adjust his mindset and battle technique for this new circumstance. Tired after the day of hunting nightmare creatures and traversing the heavenly chains, the four of them separated to go to their rooms. Reaching his own, Sunny fell on the bed, which was not a bit too short for him, and stared at the ceiling for some time, feeling restless and grim. Today, he had accomplished something that he never thought would be possible in such a short span of time. He had formed the fourth shadow core and become a devil. He was now more powerful than he had ever been, with 3 mighty shadows by his side, an arsenal of powerful memories at his disposal, and even possessing a nascent knowledge of sorcery and weaving. In fact, Sunny suspected that there had never been an awakened as powerful as him, except of course for Mordred. At least until Nephis returned from being lost in the dream realm and awakened herself. And yet, he couldn't help but wonder, Would that be enough for what was about to come? And if he survives the nightmare, would it still be possible for him to hide his strength and avoid the gaze of sovereigns? Tormented by these questions, Sunny remained awake for a long time and then finally fell into the embrace of shallow sleep. When the morning came, he opened his eyes and instantly sensed a difference. His heart felt at ease somehow, complete. His shadows had returned while he slept. Luckily, all three had survived their task. However, they were not unscathed. Both Nightmare and the Soul Serpent bore many wounds, and nestled in the nurturing black flames of his cores, slumbering as their bodies restored themselves. Saint was banged up too, but to a much lesser extent. Even though she had not had the company of a shadow, the taciturn knight fared much better than the other two. Well, that was not a surprise. She possessed attributes that specifically made her tremendously stalwart and durable after all. Plus, Saint was Saint. In any case, she was going to heal and recover much faster. The happy and creepy shadows had returned as well, and were now staring at their new sibling. The former with delighted excitement, the latter with dark and disturbing fascination. The haughty shadow ignored their stares and pretended that the others did not exist, looking past them with flawlessly disdainful indifference. Sunny muttered, "What a character." Sunny smiled, then commanded the three shadows to wrap themselves around his body, leaving only the gloomy one on the ground. Finally feeling like himself, he climbed out of bed, freshened up, and went to find Noctis. There was a lot they had to discuss. When he saw the sorcerer, however, the words died on his tongue. Noctis was not on board his flying ship, and neither was he on the edge of the island sculpting his terrible statues. Instead, the immortal transcendent had returned to his residence for once. The wooden door stood open, and the sailor dolls let Sunny through without sparing him a single glance. The interior of the sorcerer's quarters had changed once again. The floor stood cracked and broken, mounds of stone shards arching upward. As though displaced by something rising from below, the circle of runes was broken as well, devoid of any essence and utterly empty. That, however, was not what scared Sunny. What made him stumble instead was that Noctis was not holding a glass of wine as had been his habit. Instead, the sorcerer was whistling a carefree tune and brewing himself tea. Sunny froze and breathed. Oh, crap. What had it been that the sorcerer told him soon after they met? Gather the knives, start a war against both the Ivory City and the Red Colosseum, kill all of the Chain Lords, defy the Lord of Light, break the will of gods, release the demon of desire out of her prison, and have a cup of tea. But then Noctis corrected himself and said that he should probably have tea first. Sunny gulped and whispered, "It's starting." As Sunny was standing still, petrified by what he saw, Noctis finished brewing the tea and poured the amber liquid into a beautiful porcelain cup. Then, the sorcerer raised it to his face, inhaled the fragrant steam, and let out a satisfied sigh. Then, noticing an unexpected guest, he glanced at Sunny and smiled.
Sunless, what a nice surprise. Wait, did something about you change?
The sorcerer tilted his head with a confused expression, studied the towering figure of the shadow devil for a few moments, and then suddenly brightened up.
Oh, it's your horn. When did you break it?
Sunny stared at the cup in the immortal's hands, then grasped the extraordinary rock. He didn't really have to hold the memory to make use of it, but at the moment, Sunny was experiencing a desperate need to hold on to something. Anything. Taking a careful breath, he gripped the rope and said hoarsely,
"I'm back in the Temple of the Chalice. You are drinking tea."
Noctis lingered for a bit, glanced at his cup, and then smiled.
What a prudent observation. Come, let's not let this nice tea get cold.
With that, the sorcerer turned around and headed deeper into his residence, gesturing for Sunny to follow. The teapot flew into the air and hovered above the immortal's shoulder as well. As soon as Sunny made a step forward, however, Noctis suddenly turned, looked at him with a strange expression and said,
Try not to step on anything that seems to be. Actually, just don't move at all. We don't want for anything to happen, right?
At that moment, the chamber trembled again and more cracks appeared on its stone floor. Sunny stared down with a somber expression, then sighed and used Shadow Step to appear near the sorcerer and asked, "Why? What's under there?" Noctis smiled and replied, "Oh, nothing, just a memento from an old friend. Don't worry about it." Sunny, however, did worry. He was not a complete fool. The vast circle of runes, the torrential flood of soul essence that the sorcerer saturated it with, the pool of blood that the ancient stones had absorbed, all of it pointed to something dreadful being imprisoned, or maybe created there in the darkness of the earth. However, he thought better of asking any questions and simply followed Noctis to the stone stairs situated on the other side of the chamber. Using them, they ascended to the top of the ring of giant menhirs and sat down at an elegant wooden table. The sorcerer leaned back in his chair, gazed upon the breathtaking vista of the Kingdom of Hope, and took a sip of tea with an expression of deep satisfaction on his face. Sunny lingered for a few moments, giving Noctis time to enjoy himself, and then asked,
"It has begun, hasn't it? The other chain lords, they are ready to make their move."
The sorcerer took another sip, sighed, and then said in a relaxed tone,
"Oh, indeed. I suspect that their herald will arrive in a few days, so you might want to relax for a bit. Enjoy the tea. This will probably be the last moment of peace you will have for a while, Sunless, or maybe even the very last."
Sunny remained silent for a long time, a myriad of important questions pressing on his mind. But then, he simply shook his head, chased them away, and poured some tea into a delicate cup that stood on the table as if waiting for him. Neither of them spoke for a while, enjoying the fragrant drink and the beautiful sight of the flying islands in peace. Despite the approaching doom, the world felt tranquil and warm here on the parapet of the sanctuary. After a while, Noctis sighed and said in a wistful tone,
"I am going to miss this, I think."
Then he glanced at Sunny and asked with a hint of curiosity in his voice,
"Tell me, Sunless, why are you here? It is no surprise that someone like me would want to free Hope. But what would compel a shadow like you to attempt it as well? You must know the risk."
Sunny remained silent for a few moments, then sighed.
"To tell you the truth, I don't really know. I used to know, or at least think that I knew. I had lofty desires, to grow stronger than others, to break free from the chains of fate, and maybe I harbor those desires still. But after coming to this cursed land and being ground into dust by it, now everything is so unclear, and my ardent desires suddenly seem so lacking."
He paused, looked down, and then added evenly,
"Or maybe it's just me who is lacking and lost."
Noctis glanced at him, took a sip of tea, and asked with a curious smile,
"What is it that you think you are lacking, and from what are you lost?"
Sunny did not speak immediately, letting the pressure of the flaw build inside his soul for a few moments. Then he said with a grin,
"How should I know? If I had an answer for that, I wouldn't be feeling this way, would I?"
He chuckled and then asked,
"Have you heard the legend of a hero named Odysseus?"
Noctis blinked a couple of times, then shook his head.
"Never heard of that guy. A legend, really. Strange that some third-rate hero I don't even know got to have a whole legend to himself."
Sunny smiled and then said,
"A good friend told me that legend. Odysseus spent 10 years away from home, fighting a war in a distant land. And then he spent 10 more years trying to find his way back home. He lost all his friends and endured countless hardships, facing terrible monsters and dangerous beings of all sorts. But he never gave up and eventually returned home, to Ithaca."
His smile disappeared, replaced by a distant expression. After a few moments of silence, Sunny sighed.
"I feel like Odysseus too sometimes, lost in a distant land. Only unlike him, I don't have a home to want to return to. I have nothing to strive for apart from saving my skin, keeping my friends alive, and maybe living a little bit better than a wild beast. Can someone really be lost if they don't belong anywhere?"
Noctis took a sip of his tea, solemnly pondered on it for a bit, and then said thoughtfully,
I see, I understand. So what you lack is a house. That is why you are trying to free hope, to get a house? Wait, Sunless, are you trying to say that you want to repossess the ivory tower?
Sunny choked on his tea, then glared at the sorcerer with outrage.
What even? No, that is not what I am saying. Home is just a metaphor, you immortal fool.
Noctis blinked a couple of times, then asked with a deadpan expression.
What's a metaphor?
Sunny stared at him for a few moments, then snorted and opened his mouth, intending to answer. Before he did, however, a loud rattling of chains resounded in the air and the whole sanctuary shuddered slightly beneath them. No, it was the island itself. The whole island trembled. Sunny froze and then asked, his voice tense and grim.
What the hell was that?
Noctis calmly finished his tea, closed his eyes in delight for a moment, and then looked west.
It's their herald, I guess. He seems to have arrived sooner than I expected. Ah, what a bother. We didn't even get to drink the whole pot.
Noctis sighed, then placed his empty cup on the table and stood up. He straightened the folds of his silk garment, then shook his head with a slight smile and headed across the stone plain of the menhirs. Sunny scrambled to catch up to him, full of apprehension. The first thing he said to the sorcerer, however, had nothing to do with the messenger of the Chain Lords.
The metaphor is a figure of speech, sort of like an analogy.
Noctis glanced at him with surprise.
I must say, your composure is commendable, Sunless. However, do you really think that this is very important right now? Come now, we need to meet our visitor before he reaches the sanctuary.
The sorcerer gestured at the silhouette of the flying ship that hovered some distance away, almost at the same height as them. Sunny summoned the dark wing, and then said,
No, I don't. Why can't we meet the herald here, though? No, wait. If he did not even reach the sanctuary yet, why is the island shaking?
Noctis shrugged and gracefully rose into the air, flying toward the ship. What means he was using to do so, Sunny did not know. All he could do was jump as high as he could, and then glide forward. The sorcerer glanced at him, and then said somberly,
If we were to meet the herald here, my beautiful sanctuary might, well, get damaged. That would not do. As to why the island is shaking, I guess we'll see.
Soon they landed on the deck. The sailor dolls had already raised the sails and were hurrying around, preparing the ship for departure. Cassie, Kai, and Effie were also there, although they seemed to have arrived only moments before Sunny and Noctis. As Sunny looked at them with a silent question, Effie simply nodded toward Cassie. The mystery of their swift reaction was easily revealed. The sorcerer went to the stern of the flying ship without wasting any time and took his position as the Kybernetes, the guide who steered the ship as it flew through the air. The ancient vessel had no steering wheel, of course, and instead relied on 2 steering oars which were situated at the very rear of it. There was a runic circle inscribed between the oars. Noctis stepped inside, turned, leaned comfortably on the bending inner surface of the tall apluster, and placed his hands on the oars with a relaxed expression on his face. A moment later, the circle shimmered with ethereal light. The flying ship had to be controlled both physically and with soul essence. There were invisible energy pathways spanning the whole length of it, all leading to the roots of the beautiful tree growing around the main mast. Luckily, it was the tree that produced the tremendous flow of essence required to propel the vessel through the air and not the Kybernetes. Otherwise, Cassie would have never been able to fly it in the future. However, the pilot still needed to control that flow and serve as its nexus. And so, only an awakened could do it, or a transcendent. Noctis sent his own essence into the runic circle, connecting his soul to the ship, and the ancient vessel slowly started to move, gaining speed as the wind filled its sails. Holding the oars with a carefree smile, the sorcerer then glanced at Cassie and said,
Song of the Fallen, my lady, you wish to observe how I control this beauty? Here is your chance to see a master at work. Truly, there is no helmsman more skilled and distinguished than me in the whole of the Kingdom of Hope. Granted, this flight won't be too long.
He suddenly grew silent, glanced at the blind girl with a guilty expression on his face, and then awkwardly cleared his throat.
Well, I guess "see" was the wrong word to use.
Cassie remained silent for a few moments, then said neutrally,
I am used to it, do not worry.
Knowing that the young woman had been interested in the flying ship and its mysteries, Sunny left the two of them alone and walked to the side, staring into the distance with a tense look on his face. Noctis had failed to explain why the approach of the herald caused the sanctuary to tremble, but Sunny had an idea. The islands were all connected to each other by the heavenly chains, and so any strong tremor was bound to spread outward like a wave. The question was, what could have caused a quake strong enough for them to feel from several islands away? Perhaps a giant steel colossus could. He gritted his teeth and grumbled, a messenger of the chain lords. Was that a joke? Noctis conveniently failed to mention that this herald was going to be one of those lords himself. And what the hell had the sorcerer meant, saying that they had to meet the herald elsewhere to avoid damaging the sanctuary? Weren't they simply going to speak? That was what messengers were for, weren't they, to deliver words? As several islands flowed past beneath the speeding ship, he suddenly caught sight of an especially familiar one. Of course, in this era, it looked different. The Iron Hand Island was still rather large and covered by soft grass, but the ancient stone columns that had been broken in the future still stood tall, forming 3 concentric circles. From above, they seemed like a giant sundial, or moondial perhaps. And of course, there was no colossal iron hand laying in the center of the island. To give it the peculiar name, at least not yet, Sunny suddenly felt cold shivers run down his spine. He didn't have time to think about it more, however, because at that moment something else attracted his attention. Some distance away, shrouded in the haze of dawn, he could see the neighboring island. Currently, it was in a higher position than them. The island suddenly swayed, and a small human figure jumped from its edge. Or rather, it just seemed small because of the distance. Sunny felt Kai grow still and tense by his side. As the sun shined on its steel surface, the figure flew through the air, covering an unimaginable distance with its leap. It seemed to be moving slowly, but Sunny knew that this was just a mirage caused by the scale of things. And indeed, the radiant figure grew larger and larger with each moment, turning into a brilliant steel giant as it drew closer, easily breaching several kilometers with his jump. The giant landed on the surface of the Iron Hand Island, causing the whole of it to lurch sideways and sway. The heavenly chains rattled widely, and a cloud of debris was raised into the air. Not paying the chaos he had caused any attention, the colossus then slowly straightened, grew motionless, and then slightly turned his head. He was looking directly at the flying ship, no expression written on his beautiful steel face, 2 suns reflecting in the polished surface of his steel eyes. The Sun Prince had come to deliver a message to Noctis. Looking at the colossus, Sunny understood why Kai had called him terrifying. Sun Prince stood at nearly 90 meters tall, towering above the island like a mountain of steel. He was cast in the shape of a noble warrior wearing light armor. The surface of the armor was polished and shone blindingly in the sun, while the rest of the giant was dull and gray. The colossal statues of the 7 heroes of the Forgotten Shore, including the walking one Sunny and the cohort had ridden once, were more than twice as tall, but it was hard not to get shocked by the sheer mass and crushing presence of the transcendent chain lord, or rather, of the steel shell he was entombed within. A sickening feeling of fear grasped Sunny's heart, which he then strangled and banished, looking at the towering lord with a grim expression. He had a reason to feel fear, however. A half-forgotten image of a nightmarish scene flashed before his eyes. A fragment of a nightmare where he stood petrified on a blood-soaked battlefield, watching in horror as a giant steel soul descended from above to turn him, and his fellow soldiers, into puddles of crushed bones and bloody sludge. And another, a memory of endless harrowing torture that he had endured at the hands of his brother, of a human-shaped cage and a pit filled with molten metal. And finally, the last one. The vision of a giant steel corpse swinging forlornly in torn chains, upside down. its chest shattered by some devastating strike. So, this was Sun Prince. Sunny had never met him, and yet, it felt as though they were old acquaintances, for better or worse. As the giant stared at the flying ship with a motionless face of a statue, Sunny turned to Noctis and scowled, muttering under his breath to ask what they should do now. The sorcerer sighed, then moved one of the oars, sending the vessel into a descent. His carefree smile was starting to look a little forced.
Now well, we go and talk to him, I guess, have a civilized discussion.
Sunny turned back and looked at Sun Prince for a bit, then said somberly,
Do you think he knows that it was you who erased his memory of hiding the ivory knife, causing him to experience 100 years of torture and then end up in this state, and that you actually stole it instead?
Noctis suddenly choked, causing the ship to careen sideways, and hissed.
Say it louder, will you?
Sunny froze, then offered a quiet apology. The sorcerer righted the vessel, then said with outrage,
First of all, I did not cause anything. I just granted a colleague's request. Back then, we did not even know that hope was driving us all mad, so how was I supposed to know what will happen? Secondly, I did not steal the ivory knife. I just happened to find it where he had left it, all right, by pure coincidence. And lastly,
he paused, and then added in a darker tone,
I am not sure that he really knows anything anymore. He is still alive, somewhere inside, but I don't think he is fully sentient, at least I hope that he is not.
The ship approached the ground in somber silence, stopping just outside the first ring of pillars and hovered in place. Noctis lingered for a few moments and then let go of the oars. However, he did not command the sailor dolls to lower the sails. The sorcerer straightened his garments and then inhaled deeply.
Let's go and see what he has to say, shall we?
Sunny glanced at his friends, then shook his head and followed Noctis. There was a high chance that they were going to witness a brawl between saints. He was sure that everyone understood what danger they were all in. The last time he witnessed two saints fighting, a whole island had been destroyed and crumbled into the sky below. Sunny and Cassie had only survived that terrifying clash by promptly running away, and even then just barely. What was going to happen today? And was Noctis strong enough to ward off the Colossus? Somehow it was hard to imagine anything, let alone the flimsy sorcerer stopping that mountain of steel. But Noctis was no fool. Surely he had a plan. His madness was of an insidious kind after all. He would not have risked his safety and his desire to free Hope without having a way out. Together, the five of them disembarked the flying ship, landed on the soil of the Iron Hand Island, and walked between the tall pillars. They approached the very center of the giant moondial and stopped there, waiting. When they did, Sun Prince finally moved, walking toward them with a measured gait. With each of his steps, the island trembled, causing the heavenly chains to rattle and their hearts to tremble. Sunny was staring at the approaching Colossus, feeling worse and worse about the situation. All his shadows were yet to recover, and so he was left with nothing but his own strength to react should something happen. Well, his own strength. And that of his cohort. But what could they do against this monstrosity, even together? Finally, the giant reached the pillars and stopped outside the outward circle, looking at them from high above. Drowned in his cold shadow, Sunny couldn't help but feel like a tiny insect. Looking up with a grave expression, he gritted his teeth and muttered that he felt like an ant. Effie, who was also craning her neck to stare at the Colossus, glanced at him, hesitated for a moment, and then smiled.
You are not an ant, Sunny. You are a cockroach, remember.
He blinked a couple of times, then slowly grinned. Somehow that made him feel better. And then a thundering voice suddenly resounded from all around them, making their bones rattle. The giant spoke, he said. Noctis, you have the knives. The voice of Sun Prince did not sound human, but neither did it sound robotic. It was just strange and empty, as though it was not a person speaking, but the world itself, a desolate world full of ruins. Hearing it, the sorcerer grimaced, then covered his ears, muttering under his breath that Sun Prince still remembered how to speak. The thundering voice of the Colossus resounded once more, making them shiver. "Surrender the knives." Sunny turned his head slightly and glanced at Noctis, wondering what his reaction would be. The sorcerer meanwhile blinked a few times, and took a big step back, distancing himself from Sunny. Then he raised a hand, pointed a finger at him, and said with sincere confusion,
"What are you talking about? I don't have any knives. It's this guy over here, he has them. So, if you want them, come and take them from him. Leave this poor sorcerer out of this, by the moon."
Sunny froze in place, dumbfounded, and just stood still for a moment. Surrounded by stunned silence, all he could hear was the wild beating of his heart and the hum of blood rushing in his ears. His eye twitched. He breathed that there was no way the bastard just did this to him. As all four of his shadows wrapped themselves around his body, Sunny turned his head slightly and stared at the sorcerer's finger, which was, without a shadow of a doubt, pointing straight at his broad back. His mouth turned dry. He hissed that the bastard really had done it. What the hell was Noctis thinking? No, the sorcerer would not have sold him out. Yes, shifting the blame on Sunny had to be a con of some sort, but what would Noctis achieve by doing this? Nothing. Unless, of course, this had been his plan all along. A cold, sickening feeling suddenly grasped Sunny's heart. High above him, the gaze of the dreadful Colossus slowly shifted from the elegant figure of the sorcerer to the four-armed devil standing by his side. The weight of that gaze pressed down on Sunny, making him bare his teeth in a snarl. It felt as if he was being pierced by it, his very soul laid bare. And somewhere within his soul, locked inside the covetous coffer, were the three knives. One made of obsidian, one made of glass, one made of blood-red ruby. Something changed about the terrifying presence of Sun Prince, and his deafening voice resounded once again, now suffused by a distant, pale echo of a vague emotion. Shadow. Sunny paled. He had forgotten that the master of the original Shadow Spawn was to blame for what happened to the Prince of the Ivory City as well. In fact, one could even say that Shadow Lord was the main culprit of the 100 years of harrowing torture that Sun Prince endured. He had stolen the Ember Knife after all, so if the Steel Colossus had a reason to really hate someone. Sunny cursed under his breath. Feeling his hearts turn cold, Sunny silently watched as the Colossus shifted his weight, then bent slightly, preparing to reach down with his giant steel hand. He was desperately trying to calculate his chances of escaping this situation alive. At that moment, Noctis suddenly cleared his throat and then addressed Sun Prince in a friendly tone.
"Oh, but do be careful. You know how tricky shadows are, my friend. This one in particular is full of treachery, vileness, and unspeakable malice. The beast even slaughtered a temple full of innocent maidens. He also tried to poison me. Oh, the villainy. So, be careful when you grab him, or you just might lose your hand."
A low growl escaped from Sunny's mouth. He could feel the other members of the cohort grow tense and ready to fight. Cassie's hand fell on the hilt of the quiet dancer, and Kai outstretched his own, ready to summon his bow. Effie was staring up with a somber expression on her childish face, her body drawn like a spring. But what were they supposed to do? Even if Sunny knew which of the three knives was meant for Sun Prince, how could he thrust it into the Transcendent's flesh? The actual body of the Chain Lord was buried somewhere inside the walking mountain of steel. More than that, using the knife would only make him mortal. After that, he would still have to be killed somehow. Killing a saint was no easy task. As the Colossus leaned down and moved his hand to reach inside the Mundial, Sunny was thinking feverishly. He saw only one option: to run away as fast as he could. Using Shadow Step, he would be able to dodge at least. But for how long would he be able to outrun the giant? Sunny had seen him breach the gap between two islands with one jump. Now that the range of shadow control had grown, Sunny could possibly do the same. The difference was that a single jump like that was going to drain all his essence, while Sun Prince would be able to pursue him indefinitely, tireless and inescapable like death itself. Sunny muttered a string of curses under his breath. The world suddenly grew darker, the sun obstructed by a giant palm. It was open, descending from above like a vast plain of gray steel. It was as though the sky itself was falling on his head. Effie took a step back and hissed.
Sonny, what do we do?
Frozen in place, he hesitated for a moment, and then told them to do nothing. Don't do anything, don't move. There was no point in trying to fight Sun Prince or even running away, because... As the steel colossus leaned over the outer ring of the ancient moondial, the tall pillars shone with ethereal light, suddenly flooded with a mind-boggling amount of soul essence. A myriad of runes revealed themselves, carved in a vast circle that encompassed the whole structure. And then everything around them turned to light, cold, pale light of the moon. Blinded by it, Sunny didn't see what happened next and just felt something vast and chilling, and yet intangible, move past him with stunning speed. Then he heard the thunder of a deafening impact and the groan of steel that was being torn apart. The whole island shook, the quake throwing him to the ground. Sunny hit the cold stones and sensed the shadow of Sun Prince, changing. As the pale moonlight dimmed and was extinguished, he saw a shocking sight. The moondial lay broken, the pillars shattered and toppled over. Not too far away from him, a giant steel hand rested on the ground. However, it was not attached to the body of the colossus anymore. The giant was staggering back, his right arm torn at the shoulder. A river of molten metal was flowing from the terrible wound, falling down like blood. The grass was turning to ash where it fell. And amidst all of this, unperturbed stood Noctis. The sorcerer's expression was calm and slightly amused. Staring at all the chaos, he flicked a speck of dust off his silk garments, shook his head and said,
Have I not warned him to be careful? I did, didn't I? By the moon, why does no one listen to me? I am the wisest man in all of Kingdom of Hope, after all.
The colossus staggered back, swayed, and then moved his foot to balance himself. The island quaked once more, and the giant grew still, bent slightly and grasping the gaping wound with his one remaining hand. His head turned, staring at Noctis with the same empty, unmoving expression. However, his polished steel eyes, which had been burning with the blinding reflections of the sun, became submerged in deep shadow. For a moment, there was silence. Sunny gritted his teeth, then slowly exhaled and raised a hand to wipe the sweat off his brow. After the initial panic of being sold out by Noctis, he had forced himself to calm down and think. It was then that Sunny had realized that they were not in real danger and told his friends to stand down. The immortal sorcerer was many things, including a liar and a cheat. Sunny did not doubt that Noctis had lied to him on many occasions and about many things, sometimes for a specific purpose, and sometimes simply for the fun of it. However, one thing that Noctis was not was a fool. Sunny could imagine many situations in which the immortal would betray and damn him to death, but not without a good reason. And surrendering the cohort to Sun Prince was the opposite of what Noctis wanted to achieve. At best, it would have bought him some time, at the expense of losing the 3 knives to the other chain lords. One thing that Sunny did not doubt was the sincerity of the sorcerer's desire to free Hope. And so, he had understood that the immortal's sudden betrayal was just another deception. It had not been hard to guess what the purpose of the deception was as well. After all, Sunny had already guessed the fateful meeting between rebellious Noctis and the Herald of the Chain Lords was going to end, and how the Iron Hand Island would get its name. Sun Prince had walked right into the sorcerer's trap. And Sunny had been used as bait, not for the first time and probably not for the last. So he wasn't very shocked by the sight of the giant's missing arm and of the streams of molten steel that flowed out of it, slowly cooling on the broken stones. Or at least he wasn't supposed to be. In reality, the scene in front of him was so striking, so tremendous that it was simply impossible to remain untouched by the vast and poignant scale of it. Still, he turned to Noctis, remained silent for a moment, and then let out a low growl.
You could have warned me, you know.
The sorcerer looked at him with sincere confusion. Then he smiled and said,
But what if I changed my mind at the last moment? Then, warning you would have made me a liar. I have a reputation to uphold, don't I?
With that, Noctis winked at him, then turned to face the motionless colossus. As Sunny stared at him darkly, The smile slowly disappeared from the sorcerer's face, making way for something cold and frightening. His gray eyes shone with distant moonlight, and in that moonlight there was madness. Taking a step forward, Noctis suddenly appeared to be taller than he had been, his previously contained presence spreading over the world like a flood. Sunny shivered, feeling like prey being stalked by a hungry predator. The air suddenly seemed to smell of blood, the light of the sun appeared slightly dimmer, and in the echoing silence they could almost hear the howls of countless beasts. Even though Sunny knew and somewhat trusted Noctis, he suddenly felt scared. And he wasn't even the focus of the immortal's furious gaze. Instead, it was aimed at the hunched colossus. The sorcerer grinned, revealing his canines, and spoke, his clear voice flowing across the island like a river of blood.
Surrender the knives. Ah, I don't think so, my old friend. If I do, how will I kill you and your vile brother?
He laughed and then took another step forward, raising his hand. A toppled pillar then blocked his path, exploded into a rain of shards and stone dust, obliterated in a split second.
And that is what I intend to do. You, Severus Solvin. I'll kill you all, break the chains that bind the demon of desire, and set her free.
Noctis took another step and then stopped, staring at Sun Prince with ruthless determination.
So, if you want to take the knives, you'll have to take them off my cold corpse. Oh, wait, you can't. I am immortal.
He threw his head back and laughed again. This time, the sorcerer's laughter did not seem carefree and infectious. Instead, it was chilling and full of madness. The steel colossus looked at him from above, unmoving. His face was motionless and unexpressive, like that of a statue. However, it seemed as though the shadows veiling his eyes grew even deeper. Noctis shook his head and then said with disdain,
"Oh, but you can try, of course. Go back. Go back and return with the Sun Legion, with the Dragon Severax, with the warriors of the Red Colosseum, with Solvin. You know where to find me, and I'll be waiting to welcome you."
The giant continued to stare at him for a while, the molten steel flowing between his fingers. Sunny held his breath, not knowing what was going to happen next. Then Sun Prince straightened, turned around and walked away, making the island shake with each step. He reached the edge of it, stepped down on the heavenly chain, and continued walking, somehow keeping perfect balance. The chain was colossal in its own right, and yet the giant made it seem like a thin rope being traversed by a rope walker. Soon he reached the neighboring island, climbed on it, and disappeared from sight. Only the rattling of chains and the tremors running through the ground from time to time reminded them of his visit. Well, that, and the giant hand laying not too far away from them. Sunny studied it for a while, then walked over to Noctis and asked, his voice low and cautious.
Not to complain, but why let him go? Wouldn't it be easier to kill him right here and now? We won't get another chance to catch him alone, most likely, and judging by how easily you took his arm off.
Noctis did not respond immediately. Instead, he slowly turned his head, looked at Sunny coldly, and then gracelessly fell on his butt, his face pale, his chest rising and falling wildly, and his breath hoarse and labored. The sorcerer cursed, looking as if he was about to vomit.
"Easily? Are you insane? I am at my weakest during the day, remember? And that strike, gods. I spent several centuries infusing this shrine with moonlight. Do you think there's another one just laying around nearby? Just be happy he believed my bluff. Otherwise, things might have turned really ugly really fast for us."
Sunny stared at the sorcerer with wide eyes for several long moments, then shook his head and sighed, muttering that Noctis was a lunatic, a damned lunatic, and by the moon, he took it back. Noctis was a fool. It was only later, when they returned to the flying ship and looked down upon the devastation that the short and furious clash between Noctis and Sun Prince had created, did the understanding of what had happened finally settled in their minds. There was no going back now. The War of Immortals had finally started. Soon, the whole of the Kingdom of Hope was going to be turned into a battlefield and drowned in blood by its frenzy. And then, The repercussions of that madness were going to spread outward like a tidal wave, changing the world forever. Looking down, Sunny couldn't help but shiver. The broken pillars, the severed hand of a giant, the ash swirling in the air. This place, this event, this moment in time. Was that the spark that would eventually ignite another, much more terrifying war? A war between gods and demons, one that would destroy them all and bring about the end of the world. The war to end all wars. He still suspected that it was the unchaining of the demon of desire that had set it in motion. Looking down, Sunny silently whispered,
But then came desire, and with it came direction.
Turning his head slightly, he looked at Noctis, the person who had started it all. The sorcerer seemed calm and without a worry in the world. His beautiful face was pale with exhaustion, but other than that, he did not look too different from his usual self. Not at all like a person who had potentially ushered in the obliterating apocalypse. Did he not understand the consequences of his actions? Or did he understand them far better than Sunny ever could? With a sigh, Sunny threw one last glance at the Iron Hand Island, not truly and once again deserving of its name, and walked to sit beneath the branches of the sacred tree. Despite the fact that he had not done much, he felt exhausted too, and there was a lot he had to think about. On the way back, Sunny remembered the future. He had been to the Iron Hand Island many times, had seen the toppled pillars and the severed arm of a giant, and had even sketched and described them in detail for an exploration report. And now, he had witnessed how the island came to be in that state. Another event from the distant past had repeated itself inside the nightmare almost to a T. Sunny had already formed a theory that fate was like a current, always pulling things toward an inescapable conclusion after the destruction of the Temple of the Chalice. The details could be changed, but the result seemed to always be the same. The events that had transpired on the Iron Hand Island only cemented that theory. By all accounts, the appearance of the cohort and Mordred should have drastically changed the flow of history in the Kingdom of Hope. They had accelerated the start of the war and even slain one of the Chain Lords, if not for them. Noctis would have most likely spent several years searching for a way to make a deal with Weaver, and only then rebelled against the other immortals. Those several years were, perhaps, the countdown to the blossoming of the nightmare seed. If no awakened appeared to challenge the nightmare by then, the seed would have bloomed. Was that the logic? Seeds blossomed when the conflict inside them resolved itself and fate repeated unchanged. Before, Sunny had thought that the task of the challenger was to resolve a conflict that would have otherwise remained unresolved. But now, knowing what he knew about the Chained Islands and the Kingdom of Hope, he realized that he had been wrong. With or without his help, Noctis was always going to start a war. The Ivory Tower was always going to break free from its chains. The Temple of the Chalice was always going to be destroyed, and Sun Prince was always going to lose his hand to the enchanted Moondial. Come to think of it, his first nightmare would have resolved itself without his intervention too, one way or another. The nameless temple slave would have probably died, and Aro of the Nine would have survived. Or would they? In any case, there would have been an ending. Sunny muttered that it didn't really make sense. So what was the role of the challengers? If the conflict could resolve itself, why were they here? What did the spell want from them? Prove that they were equal to the heroes of the past? Do it better than them? Simply survive? The spell did not care what one did inside the nightmare and how they went about solving the conflict. The reward was going to be the same, either way. The challenger would ascend to a new rank. They could receive a true name or even, in extremely rare cases, an evolution of their aspect, but those things could be done outside a nightmare as well. The only thing the spell cared about was that the challenger survived until the end, but that was not entirely true. The spell would not give additional rewards or deny the survivor their ascension. However, it did care a little, at least enough to appraise the challenger's performance. The appraisal did not really matter outside of the first nightmare, where it was tied to the boon, but the spell still gave them out each time. Good, exceptional, remarkable, glorious, and so on. Was there a hint in there, somewhere, about what it wanted? If so, Sunny had apparently pleased the spell very much in his first trial. Sitting in the shade of the sacred tree, he sighed and looked into the distance with a solemn expression, whispering that he hoped the spell would be pleased with them again, this time, and that he hoped they would survive. Soon, the flying ship returned to the sanctuary and descended to its usual position above the altar island. As they returned to the ground, Sunny could see hundreds of faces turned to them, fear and uncertainty written in their lines. The inhabitants of the sanctuary had not seen the clash between Noctis and Sun Prince, but they all knew that something was wrong. By now, the island had stopped trembling, but their hearts did not, without paying them any attention. The sorcerer tiredly landed on the grass, then turned to Sunny and frowned slightly.
I am going to rest for a couple of days. Most of the Sun Legion, as well as the army of the Red Colosseum, are arrayed along the border between Solvin's territory and that of the Ivory City. It is going to take them at least 2 weeks to assemble together and march east. So, we will give them enough time to break the current formation, but not enough to build a new one. We attack in 7 days.
He hesitated for a few moments, and then suddenly smiled.
Warmongers and the Sun Legion forgetting their hatred and fighting side by side. Truly, no one but me could have made it happen. Am I not the most talented diplomat in all of the Kingdom of Hope?
With that, Noctis laughed, turned around, and walked away. Sunny stared at his back for a few moments, then sighed and murmured quietly that Noctis was definitely not the most talented diplomat, but then again, maybe he was. Next morning, Sunny woke up in a strange mood, knowing that they were nearing the end of the nightmare, and perhaps their own. He had expected himself to be consumed by somber trepidation, but surprisingly, Sunny felt fine. It was as though the scope of the approaching battle was simply too large to be evaluated, and so his mind had not bothered with it at all. Instead, he had practical problems he needed to solve. Sunny still did not feel completely comfortable in his new body. He barely had any time to get accustomed to its size and weight. After all, the next several days were going to be crucial in that regard. His previous garments had been torn when he evolved, and so Sunny summoned the puppeteer's shroud to wrap itself around his towering body. Although not as powerful as his other suits of armor, the shroud was much more comfortable. It was a bit nostalgic to wear the light armor once again, but also a bit sad to see it relegated to serving as a bona fide training suit. Remembering how he had planned to slaughter countless dormant nightmare creatures while being invulnerable thanks to his new, incredible awakened armor of the 5th tier just a few years ago, Sunny smiled wistfully and walked out of his room. The sanctuary seemed different somehow. The ring of giant menhirs was the same, and so was the beautiful garden. However, the people living in the ancient shrine had changed. They were hurried and full of fear, moving with panic speed and feverish determination. Sunny noticed a few familiar faces. The old woman he had seen on his first day here was standing alone, a lost look on her face. The young woman was carrying the frightened child in her hands and a heavy pack on her back. The kind man with a neatly trimmed beard was gritting his teeth, his hand resting on the worn hilt of his sword. He sighed and looked away. An immortal transcendent had started this war to free a demon from a prison built by a god. But these little people were the ones that were going to suffer the most as the result. In fact, they had been the ones to suffer the most throughout all of this, from the destruction of the Kingdom of Hope to the madness she had cursed this land with to now. He had been one of the little people himself, once. Now he was a devil destroying their lives. Sunny remained motionless for a few moments, then looked up at the sound of steps approaching him. He saw Effie and Kai both wearing their armors and packs as though ready to go on a long hunt. He raised his eyebrows and asked if they were going somewhere. The little girl glanced at the masked cripple and then shrugged. Kai meanwhile smiled. Even though Sunny could not see his face, he could tell by his eyes. He could also tell that the smile was tinted with sadness. The archer simply nodded.
Yes, we are leaving.
He hesitated for a moment, then added,
Not for long, of course. We will be back before the week is over. You see, the sanctuary, it was a shelter for those who wanted to find peace in this land of madness. But now that Noctis started a war, and both the Sun Legion and the warmongers are marching to raze it to the ground, that shelter is no more.
Effie shook her head, then sighed.
The West belongs to the warring cults of war and sun. The South is abandoned and overtaken by nightmare creatures, the North. Well, you know, these poor fools have nowhere else to go, so we are going to guide them to one of the great chains and help them cross to the other side, and leave the kingdom of hope behind forever.
She scratched the back of her head, then said thoughtfully,
Well, actually, we are not even sure if the nightmare goes that far. Maybe there's nothing out there beyond the chained island, and yes, we know that these people are not even real. Still, we thought that we'd at least try. Cassie even went and convinced Noctis to lend her the ship to help transport them.
Sunny stared at her surprised. The little girl raised her chin.
What? I know that it's stupid. People need to do stupid things sometimes, you know.
He slowly shook his head and replied that no, actually, he didn't think it was stupid at all. It was just that the three of them were going, so why hadn't they invited him as well? Effie grinned.
You have stuff to do. How are you going to get used to that lanky body of yours while babysitting a bunch of refugees? So, don't be lazy and get that stone girlfriend of yours to beat you black and blue while we are gone. We have a date with 2 whole armies in a week's time, remember.
Sunny made a sour face, then looked away and said that he believed her, he remembered, and he was going to train hard. Kai gripped his shoulder for a moment, well, the top of one of his lower arms that were in reach anyway, and then the two walked away without saying anything else. There was no need to say goodbye. With them gone, Sunny suddenly felt a bit lost. Shaking his head, he threw stupid thoughts out of his head and walked to the center of the garden. Intending to spend the rest of the day practicing with the cruel sight, Saint would have probably healed enough to be summoned too, so he had his work cut out for him. Finding a secluded spot near the clear lake, Sunny went through the intense set of steps and exercises that he had developed to condition his body for the shadow dance, of course, that had been in his human body. The shadow spawn, meanwhile, was a very different beast, or rather devil, despite its size. The gaunt body of the devil was incredibly nimble and swift. It was also capable of bursts of monstrous, explosive strength that would leave many people stunned. In addition, it was itself a weapon. With his talons, claws, fangs, and horns, Sunny was capable of delivering a lot of damage even unarmed. He could even kill things with the spike at the end of his tail. After that initial practice session, he summoned Saint and started the real training. As they sparred, Sunny observed the departure of the inhabitants of the sanctuary. They left in a column with Kai in the front and Effie walking behind. Some were carrying their meager belongings, while some were empty-handed. Some cried, while some remained silent and stoic. Some even smiled. Above them, the flying ship moved, carrying those who could not walk. Sunny could not see, but knew that Cassie was controlling it. For a moment, he was curious about how she was able to communicate with the sailor dolls. However, that short distraction cost him dearly when Saint delivered a painful blow to his abdomen, and so Sunny decided to concentrate on himself. Turning his full attention back to the training fight, he whispered that he wished them well. Even if they were not real, he wished them all the best. Long hours passed in arduous training. Slowly but surely, he was growing accustomed to the new proportions of his strange and powerful body. His height, his reach, his might. All of it was starting to click, making him feel confident in his own skin once more. At some point, dead tired, Sunny decided to take a break. Commanding Saint to stand down, he crouched near the lake and drew some water to wash the sweat off his face. Then he poured some on his head and sighed, looking at the clear surface of the lake. The graceful figure of Saint reflected on it, and near her, his own. Obsidian skin, bestial features, eyes that seemed like pools of liquid darkness, twisting horns. Master Jet had once joked that he would be a flower boy one day. Remembering it, Sunny smiled and mused, wondering what she would have said if she saw him that way. And then he froze. His sweat turned cold. There was a third reflection on the surface of the lake. It was a tall and slender young man with pale skin and raven black hair. His face was sharp and thin, not exactly handsome, but at the same time charming and strangely beautiful. His striking eyes didn't seem to possess a color of their own, and instead reflected the world back on itself like two pools of liquid silver. Currently, they were as blue as the boundless, vast sky. The young man smiled pleasantly and then raised a hand in greeting. A painfully familiar voice suddenly resounded in Sunny's mind.
"Ah, Sunless, how nice it is to meet you again after all this time. Just look at you. Goodness, I almost failed to recognize you behind that fearsome face."
Hearing Mordred's pleasant voice reminded Sunny of the time they had shared in the sky below and the closeness that had existed between them back then. A long time ago, he had considered the mysterious prince if not a friend, then at least an ally. He had been fond of the owner of the disembodied voice enough to worry when it disappeared. Of course, all of that had been a lie. A masterfully crafted net of deception that Mordred had created to lure Sunny into bringing the mirror shard into the Night Temple and setting him free. The memory of the dark conclusion of that story, the fear, the pain, the shame of having been led astray and betrayed, the slaughter, gripped his hearts with icy claws. Sunny glared at the reflection of the young man for a few moments, then gritted his teeth. He hated to admit it, but there was no escaping the fact that he feared Mordred. Sunny had met many powerful men and even more terrifying abominations, but the Prince of Nothing was perhaps the only one whom he was truly scared of, not because of the divine aspect or the lineage of war, but precisely because of how insidiously cunning and inexplicable the Prince of Nothing was. It was like what teacher Julius had said. What humans feared the most was the unknown, and no matter how many times Sunny tried, he simply could not understand how Mordred thought, what his motives were, and what was he scheming behind that friendly smile. Because of the eerie wrongness hiding in the depths of his eyes, the Prince of Nothing was impossible to predict. Hell, he was even impossible to kill. The whole of the great clan Valor had tried and failed. Grasping the extraordinary rock, Sunny made sure that there was no one really standing behind him and addressed the reflection in a gruff voice.
"Oh, it's you. What are doing inside the lake? Don't be a stranger, Mordred. Come enter my soul sea and let's talk face to face."
The reflection of the young man lingered, its smile turning a little forced. Then it spoke again.
"How strange. I can hear you speak, but I don't see your lips moving. Have you been learning new tricks, Sunless? Oh, good for you. I've been doing some of that myself."
Sunny scowled, shadows veiling his eyes.
I've heard, a whole region of the kingdom, Mordred. Really, I thought you did not enjoy killing innocent people. Or did you tell yourself that it was all right because they were not real?
Mordred tilted his head a little. Then he said with the same pleasant smile,
"What would have been the point of killing them if they were not real?"
Hearing that, Sunny shivered. The reflection, meanwhile, shook its head.
"They were real enough to serve a purpose. Don't get me wrong, however. I would not have done the same in the waking world. Those I killed were all already dead, Sunless. All of them were doomed, and uselessly so. I simply gave their deaths a different meaning."
Mordred did not seem pleased with himself, but neither did he seem remorseful about slaughtering thousands of people. Just uncaring, which was much more unnerving. The Prince of Nothing looked at Sunny and chuckled.
"So, that little oracle of yours told you all about my adventures then? Well, wonderful. I will not have to describe them myself. Time is of the essence, after all. Sending a reflection across such a distance is not easy, even for me."
Sunny lingered for a few moments, then sighed and crossed his forearms.
She did, even if I would not have used the word adventures to describe it. What do you want, Mordred?
The reflection remained silent for a bit, then smiled.
"Why, what else? To conquer the nightmare, of course, don't you?"
A low growl escaped from Sunny's mouth.
I do. Stop playing games and just tell me what it is that you want from me.
Mordred sighed.
"Well, if you insist, what I want is rather simple, which is not to say easy. I want you to keep Noctis alive, at all costs."
Sunny blinked.
What is he trying to make me do? Does he really want me to protect Noctis, or is he hoping that I will do the opposite of what he wants and kill Noctis instead? Why would he want Noctis dead before the war even started? No, wait, maybe he really does want Noctis to live. Damned Mordred, I hate that lying bastard.
He stared at the reflection with a dark expression, and then asked evenly if that was all. The Prince of Nothing smiled.
Yes, that is all. If you can accomplish this simple task, I can guarantee that we will conquer the nightmare and escape it alive.
Sunny snorted.
You can guarantee it, can you? How? What are you planning? What about Hope? Will you try to free her, or have you found a way to restore her prison to its original state?
A gust of wind suddenly disturbed the surface of the lake, and the reflection of the banished prince became distorted, swaying with the water. He spoke again, his voice sounding a little distant.
Ah, how inconvenient. It seems that I have run out of essence. Until we meet again, Sunless.
Sunny clenched his fists.
This again, disappearing just when you have to answer a question. Bastard, you do understand that we are on the same side right now. We can kill each other after we ascend. But first, we need to survive the nightmare.
Mordred laughed, his voice growing ethereal and almost inaudible.
Not a bastard. Ah, I wish I was.
With that, he was gone. The reflection disappeared from the surface of the lake, and Sunny was left alone once more. He glared at the clear water for some time, then grimaced and grumbled that a simple task was anything but, as though anyone could keep up with that lunatic, let alone keep him alive. With that, he gritted his teeth and rose to his feet. It was time to continue his training. Time was short. Few days passed. The sanctuary stood empty and silent. The beautiful garden was devoid of its usual liveliness, and the winds howled as they passed through the ring of giant menhirs. Here and there, mundane things left behind by the people that had departed in a hurry lay, forlorn and forgot. No one was ever going to return for them. Sunny had never seen the sanctuary this desolate and hollow, not in the future and not now in the distant past. The sight of it was sad and eerie. He had spent these days training tirelessly and learning to control his new body. This latest transformation had not been as fundamental as becoming a demon after living his whole life as a human, so his progress was swift. More than that, mastery of shadow dance made Sunny especially attuned to his physicality and chain. In truth, he did not need a whole week to achieve the goal, but practicing with Saint reminded him of the simpler times and so helped him prepare himself for the battle ahead mentally. On one of the last nights he had to spend in peace, Sunny woke up suddenly, thinking that he had heard a distant scream. Had he really, or was it just a vestige of a dream? He sat up and glanced into the window, a deep scowl appearing on his face, muttering to himself that it was no dream and that awakened don't dream. But who could have screamed in the sanctuary? There were only two people left here, Sunny himself and Noctis. He hesitated for a moment and then stood up, summoning the puppeteer's shroud. After thinking for a bit, he also summoned the cruel sight, wrapped his shadows around himself, and walked outside. The full moon shone in the night sky, drowning the world in ghostly blue light. Guided by it, Sunny walked across the empty garden and approached the residence of the sorcerer, where the immortal had disappeared 2 days earlier and never came back out. The door stood open, and the sailor dolls guarded it silently, their wooden faces devoid of any sign of worry. Passing between them, Sunny entered the residence and studied the familiar chamber. It had changed slightly. The stone floor was even more broken and littered with deep cracks. The piles of shards had grown taller. However, there were no tremors running through it from time to time anymore, as if whatever it was that had hidden beneath had either died, fallen into a slumber, or gone elsewhere. Noctis was in the middle of the room, sitting on a pile of rubble with a pained look on his face. The sorcerer looked unwell. His skin was deathly pale with dark circles under his eyes. His lustrous hair had grown dull and was disheveled. Even his elegant garments, which had always been flashy and immaculate, were now wrinkled and in disarray. What's more, Sunny could have sworn that there was something moving beneath the sorcerer's skin. It appeared for a moment and then was gone, making him unsure if he had seen it or just imagined the whole thing. Noticing his presence, Noctis slowly turned his head and smiled weakly.
Ah, Sunless, you are just in time. How do I look?
Sunny stared at him for a moment, and then replied bluntly that he looked like crap. The sorcerer blinked a couple of times, then threw a hurt look at him.
No, not me, you idiot. How does he look?
With that, Noctis gestured at a sailor doll that stood motionlessly a few steps away. Sunny had grown so accustomed to the silent mannequins that he did not pay the doll any attention after registering its presence and position. Now, he took a closer look and raised his eyebrows, confused by what he saw. The sailor doll was about the same height as Noctis, dressed in his best silks, and wearing a gorgeous black wig. It stared senselessly in front of itself and held a glass of wine. He titled his head, opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again and muttered, wondering what the hell it was. The sorcerer shrugged.
Well, we are going to unexpectedly attack the Ivory City, are we not? Surely, the other chain lords would notice if I suddenly disappear from the sanctuary. So, I prepared this doll to make it seem like I'm still here.
He smiled proudly and looked at Sunny with a glint in his eyes. Sunny covered his face with a palm for a moment, then demanded to know if Noctis really thought that this thing would fool anyone, and asked whether he had lost his mind or lost it even more. Noctis glanced at him in confusion, and then laughed.
Oh, I forgot the last touch.
With that, he raised his hands and clapped them a couple of times. A moment later, there were two sorcerers in the chamber, one sitting on the pile of rubble, the other standing a few meters away and staring at Sunny with an obnoxious smile. Even though he knew that the second one was just a sailor doll, he couldn't tell the difference.
How about now?
Sunny gulped and conceded that it looked fine. The sailor doll remained motionless for a bit, then raised the glass of wine to its lips, pretending to drink. The likeness was uncanny. But more than that, Sunny could feel that the real enchantment went much deeper than just looks. He could actually feel a suffocating presence radiating from the mannequin, similar to what he had felt on the Iron Hand Island from Noctis himself, looking beneath the surface of the sailor doll. He was stunned to see something that looked exactly like a transcendent soul core burning in its chest. Sunny slowly inhaled. If Cassie were to look at the mannequin, would she have seen an aspect name and a list of attributes? Sunny admitted that it was better than fine and very convincing. Noctis grinned, then rose to his feet with a grimace. Once again, it seemed as if something moved under his skin. But a second later, he seemed fine.
Good, well then, one last thing left to do before we leave. Follow me.
Sunny threw one last look at the broken floor of the stone chamber and then turned around. He knew that he would never return here again. Together, the two of them entered the garden and walked across it. Sunny did not know where Noctis was leading him, but felt that it was important. One of the sailor dolls followed them, carrying something heavy. As they walked, the sorcerer suddenly spoke.
I thought a lot about what you have told me, Sunless, about wanting to return home.
Sunny glanced at him with surprise, but did not say anything. Noctis remained silent for a few moments, and then said in a wistful tone,
I used to have a home too, you know, a long time ago. There was a beautiful temple where my siblings and I grew up, being taught by priests and priestesses. It was surrounded by a vast forest where we played and hunted. There was a lake where we caught fish and swam to escape the summer's heat without a care in the world.
The smile slowly disappeared from his face, and his eyes shone softly, reflecting the pale moonlight.
I returned to that place some time ago. But it was not. It changed. The temple lay in ruins, the forest had been chopped down, the lake had dried up, everything felt unfamiliar and strange, like a distant dream. And for a moment, I felt as if my whole life was just a dream that I have dreamt, and maybe was dreaming still.
He paused, sighed heavily, then suddenly smiled and looked at Sunny.
But hey, by then, I already had this sanctuary that I have built with my own two hands, the people that I saved, the land that I tried to protect, the duty I made mine to uphold. This was my home.
He inhaled deeply and looked around, enjoying the sight of the sanctuary. Sunny suddenly realized that the sorcerer was perhaps seeing it for the last time. His face grew heavy. After a few moments, Noctis said,
What I am trying to say, Sunless, is that you don't need to belong somewhere or to something. You just need to make something belong to you. That is how you can find home.
The sorcerer hesitated, and then added with a proud look on his face,
I mean it as a metaphor, of course.
Sunny looked at him for a long time, then smiled and said warmly that it was a great metaphor. Noctis grinned.
It was, wasn't it? Well, why wouldn't it be? I am the most learned man in all of the Kingdom of Hope, after all.
At that moment, they passed between the menhirs and approached the edge of the island, where the ugly monstrosities that Noctis had called statues of him stood. There were 14 of them, each at least twice as tall as Sunny and cut of solid marble. He had not looked at the fruits of the sorcerer's labor after that first time, and was momentarily disturbed. If the first statue could have been remotely called an image of a person, the rest of them, without a doubt, resembled terrifying abominations much more. They were giant and heavy, with talons, claws, fangs, spikes, and horns that made Sunny's own look pathetic in comparison. The giant gargoyles looked frightening, unsightly, ferocious. And each had mighty stone wings. Surrounded by monuments of harrowing creatures, he suddenly felt small and weak. Feeling uneasy, Sunny glanced at Noctis and asked,
These are statues of you.
The sorcerer laughed.
Oh, well, I might have lied a little. These were never meant to look like me.
With that, a sailor doll silently appeared from the darkness, carrying a heavy box that was wrapped in thick, heavy chains. As soon as Sunny saw the box, he felt his heart turn cold and muffled whispers invade his ears. Involuntarily, he took a step back and breathed, wondering what the hell was in that thing. Noctis calmly took the box, which trembled slightly, as if something inside was trying to break free. At the same time, Sunny thought that he noticed a movement under the sorcerer's skin. The immortal grimaced and then said,
Souls, a few especially vile souls that I have collected across the centuries.
Sunny scowled, gripping the cruel sight tighter, and demanded to know what exactly Noctis was planning to do with those souls. Noctis glanced at him, smiled, and then easily tore the heavy chains keeping the box shut.
What else? I'm going to create a few little helpers for you and your strange friends. What, were you really going to take on the armies of the Ivory City and the Red Colosseum all by yourself? By the moon, Sunless, I do trust in your abilities, but what would people say if I turned out to be the only chain lord without an army? How would that look? No, such an embarrassment would simply not do.
With that, he opened the box, his eyes shining with cold moonlight. And in the next moment, the 14 terrifying stone beasts suddenly moved. The flying ship was moving through the deep darkness of the sky below, escorted by 14 stone fiends. With the ocean of flames burning below and vast nothingness above, it seemed as though they were sailing through purgatory. Noctis stood at the steering oars, slouched, with a pale face and dark circles under his eyes. He did not seem to be doing too well, but his hand was steady as it controlled the ship. On the upper deck, the sailor dolls were preparing for battle. They were moving wooden ballistae into position and loading heavy bolts into them, with an especially fearsome siege engine placed at the bow. The bolts themselves were not that simple, too. Their surfaces were carved with runes, which shimmered with stored soul essence and brimmed with power. The mannequins themselves were armed, as well, their elegant liveries replaced with chainmail. They carried heavy bows, sabers, and hatchets, both to kill the enemies and defend the ship from boarding hooks. There were plenty of quivers full of arrows around, as well as barrels of water to douse the flames should the sails catch on fire. The sails, meanwhile, were turned at a strange angle to catch the hot air rising from below, surrounding the vessel from the sides like wings. The ship was flying swiftly, but in the emptiness of the sky below, it was hard to measure how much distance they were covering. Sunny could only tell that their speed was tremendous because of the powerful torrent of essence flowing through the ancient wood, and the howling of the wind that was being cut by the armored ram of the ship. At this rate, they were going to reach the Ivory City soon. The cohort was preparing for battle too. Kai had summoned his white and gold armor, a memory he had earned while commanding a centuria of the Sun Legion. Behind the charred wooden max, his eyes were serious and focused. He was examining the fletching of arrows in his quiver, a mighty bow resting at his feet. This bow had come from a champion of the war sect he had slain, and was a deadly weapon. Effie was standing nearby, leaning on the runic spear Sunny had given her. The dusk shard was propped against the board of the ship, almost as tall as the little girl, and there was a white cape that seemed to be weaved from starlight resting on her shoulders. The starlight shard, which she had received after slaying the Lord of the Dead. Of course, Effie had a whole arsenal of other memories at her disposal, those that she had collected over the years on the Forgotten Shore, and those she received for slaying countless abominations to saturate her awakened core before venturing into the seed of nightmare. Weapons, tools, charms. She was going to summon them when the need arose, knowing that the battle ahead would be long and arduous. The little girl was hungrily devouring a pile of roasted meat. Cassie was quietly observing Nox, her hand resting on the hilt of the quiet dancer. Her role in the approaching battle was going to be especially important. When the sorcerer clashed with Solvin and Sun Prince, she would have to control the flying ship and command the sailor dolls, drawing the bulk of the enemy's ire. Sunny was getting ready too. He had summoned the mantle of the underworld, which covered his demonic body like an onyx carapace. Since this battle was going to be against humans, and not mighty nightmare creatures, he had judged that its utility would be more valuable than the impregnable defense of the undying chain. There was no Elias around to heal a mortal wound should he receive one as well, so its incredible enchantment was less useful. The blood blossom rested in the onyx armor's breastplate, ready to grant him its strength, in his 4 hands. He held the cruel sight, the midnight shard, and Morgan's warbow. 3 shadows rested in his soul, ready to be sent forth to destroy and slaughter. He was ready. Well, as ready as he could be. Just as Sunny thought it, Noctis suddenly moved and then looked up, a wild smile slowly appearing on his lips. His voice sounded hoarse but clear.
Oh, they finally sensed us.
The members of the cohort turned to him, their faces calm and collected. The sorcerer grinned and then moved one of the oars, sending the ship flying up. His eyes glinted with distant moonlight.
No point in hiding anymore. We are close enough anyway. Oh, what a night to be alive, my friends.
His laughter rolled across the deck as the ancient vessel climbed higher and higher, swiftly approaching the dark side of the chained island. Sunny stared up, knowing that just in a few minutes, the end of this nightmare was going to begin. As he did, Cassie silently approached him and stood nearby for a few moments, silent. Then she said,
"No matter what happens, don't let him enter the tower."
Sunny frowned, looking at her with a somber expression, and asked if she meant Noctis. She lingered for a second and then shook her head.
"No, Mordred."
Sunny smiled and turned away, then asked why, and whether Mordred's guarantee of conquering the nightmare if they did as he said had been a lie. The young woman did not speak for a while, then said simply,
"No, I don't think so."
Sunny glanced at her and raised an eyebrow, asking why he should try to stop Mordred then. She hesitated for a moment. Then Cassie asked,
"What happens after the nightmare?"
Sunny sighed, then chuckled wryly and conceded that he would take her request into consideration. He could already see the dark underbelly of the Kingdom of Hope above them, and hear the distant whisper of war drums. Caught by surprise, the 2 armies were hurriedly preparing to meet them. Looking at his friends, Sunny sighed, and then said in a neutral voice that he guessed this was it, and wished them good luck, telling them not to die out there. Kai and Effie looked at him, and then nodded. The little girls smiled crookedly.
Why would we die? It's just a couple of armies and 3 transcendents. No big deal.
She hesitated for a bit, and then added in a somber tone,
However, let's make a promise to not do suicidal battles beneath giant towers again, okay? I mean, at this rate, it might become a habit.
Sunny looked at her and grinned, quipping that next time they should do battle on top of a giant tower. Effie sighed.
No, no towers. Let's try to avoid giant towers in the future entirely. How does that sound?
Sunny laughed, then turned away and stared at the approaching islands, replying that it sounded fine to him, though he couldn't promise anything. As the silver circle of the full moon reached the highest point in the sky, a sudden movement tore through the darkness of the night. In the clamor of drums and human voices, an armada of wooden ships flew forward, each vessel illuminated by the orange flame of lanterns. Some had red sails and some had white. In the pale moonlight, all of them looked gray and colorless. The ships rushed forward, seeming like a river of lights. On their decks, human figures moved, feverishly preparing for battle. The soldiers were drawing their weapons and knocking arrows on the strings of their bows, while the captains stared at the radiant moon, their faces tense and grim. Soon, a lonesome black dot appeared on the surface of the silver disk, and then slowly grew as it drew closer. A single ship, this one much larger and more graceful than the rest of them, was fearlessly flying to meet the luminous armada. There was a beautiful tree growing around its mast, and a man with pale skin and raven-black hair standing at the oar, guiding the vessel forward. His eyes were gray and clear, shining with the reflected light of the moon. Standing near Noctis, Sunny could not help but feel a dark resentment grip his heart. Sunny muttered a bitter curse under his breath. They had chosen the time of the attack to catch the armies of the Chain Lords unprepared. Most of the soldiers were still on march to the Ivory City, their formation broken and in disarray. It was not easy to unite two large forces, and Noctis had chosen the precise moment when the chaos was at its worst to stage his assault. And yet, there was still a considerable force ready to defend the city. At least 100 ships rose into the air to intercept and destroy them, each carrying dozens of warriors. Some of them awakened, and some even ascended. But all the absolute elite the warring factions had to offer, and somewhere out there, two immortal transcendents were waiting to take their turn. That is what Noctis and the cohort were up against. Sunny lingered for a moment, and then glanced past the approaching river of lights at the distant shapes of the Ivory City. It was as beautiful during the night as it was during the day. The graceful arches of the tall aqueducts, the aerial bridges that connected the islands, the buildings made of white stone. The streets of the city were empty, but he could feel thousands of frightened souls trembling behind the walls that they had considered solid and safe, not knowing what calamity he and his friends were bringing to their doorstep. Suddenly grim, he had to remind himself that these were the people that had tried to sacrifice Kai to satiate a dragon's hunger, and then burned him alive for daring to survive. And the dragon himself was there, too powerless for now, at least until the dawn came. Gritting his teeth, he took a step forward and closed his eyes for a moment. Sunny muttered, "Just 100 ships. What is there to fear? I just have to bring 10 or 20 down. Maybe kill a few ascendants. Big deal." The armada was already close enough to make out the distant shapes of humans rushing on the decks. A gust of wind brought with it a chorus of voices. Sunny shuddered, recognizing the familiar chant, "Glory, glory, glory." He opened his lightless eyes, all doubt and remorse disappearing from them, leaving behind only the cold will to kill. Somewhere behind him, Noctis suddenly grinned, and then whispered in a hoarse voice, "Now, witness us, gods." A moment later, the massive siege engine standing at the bow of the ship suddenly rang, sending a heavy bolt flying through the darkness. As it pierced the sky, a weave of ancient runes shone on its surface, and the winds howled, cut by its sharp blades. Streaking toward the distant armada like a falling star, the bolt struck the hull of the forward vessel, and crushed straight through it, pulverizing a large part of the bow. It tore through the innards of the enemy ship, and then an explosion of pale light suddenly illuminated the vessel from within for a split second, leaving behind nothing but a cloud of bloody debris. The whole ship was destroyed in an instant. Noctis laughed madly, and as he did, the sailor dolls were already rushing to reload the engine. While they were busy with it, the sorcerer moved one of the oars, throwing his own ship into a turn to let its left board, and the loaded ballistae situated there faced the rushing enemy fleet. And just like that, the battle that was meant to change the course of history forever started. The sorcerer's ship had an advantage in size, speed, power of enchantments, and the reach of its weapons. However, the difference was not insurmountable. Before the bow engine could be reloaded, they would already be being pelted by arrows and harpoons of the enemy. Noctis called out, "Get ready, my friends." The sailor dolls pulled the levers of the portside ballistae, sending several smaller but still devastating bolts flying toward the approaching armada. Others readied their bows, staring forward with indifferent wooden faces. Sonny raised Morgan's warbow, ready to draw it, and threw a question over his shoulder, asking, "What of solving? What of Sun Prince?" Noctis smiled wickedly.
Can't you feel? They are approaching. Song of the Fallen, my lady. I am afraid you will have to take the oars soon. Do not worry, however. As long as the moon shines, I will make easy work of those two. He lingered for a moment, sending the ship into another turn, and then added, "Do worry about the enemy ships, though. If you are not careful, they will tear my beauty apart in no time, not to mention peppering you full of arrows."
The ships he mentioned were almost in range to shoot their own onagers and ballistae. Even though the sorcerer's vessel was graceful, swift, and stalwart, it seemed impossible for anything to survive the devastating rain of projectiles. Sonny tensed, his pupils narrowing into two vertical slits of pure darkness. A few moments before the onslaught came, however, 14 fearsome shadows suddenly flew from below the islands and flashed upward, colliding against the first row of the enemy ships. Splinters of wood and torn limbs shot into the air, and for a moment, the enemy's formation was broken. Using that moment, Noctis sent the ship into a dive, narrowly avoiding the aim of the armada, and at the same time presenting its starboard. Another set of ballistae shot their bolts, adding to the mayhem. The sorcerer glanced at Sonny, Effie, and Kai with a wild smile, calling out, "It is your turn, Sunless, now or nev." Then, however, he abruptly grew silent and flinched. Noctis' face, which had already been pale, turned white as a sheet. He groaned and then slowly turned his head, looking up with a stunned expression. A moment later, Sonny heard the immortal let out an ominous whisper, murmuring, "Oh, this is not good at all." Feeling a cold shiver run down his spine, Sonny turned and followed the sorcerer's gaze up and up into the night sky. Then he froze. Sonny stammered, "What?" "The moon." The moon was disappearing. Out there in the sky, the silver disk of the moon was slowly being devoured by darkness, as if drowning in a vast and impenetrable shadow. One of its edges was already gone, and with each moment, more and more of it was being erased by the shadows. It looked like an eclipse. Noctis paled, and at the same time, Sonny suddenly felt reinvigorated. It was as though every shadow in the world had just become deeper and darker, and as one of them, he did too. The feeling was strange and euphoric, but Sonny knew that this eclipse was an ill omen for all of them. Turning to the sorcerer, he asked, "What is going on?" Noctis stared at the disappearing moon with a dark expression, and then shivered.
I guess Severus had a trick of his own up his sleeve. I did not expect him to get his hands on a piece of Shadow's domain, though. How is this even possible?
Seeing a lost expression on the sorcerer's face, Sonny growled, "How severe is your flaw? How weak are you going to be when the moon is fully gone? What do we do now?" The fleet of the Ivory City was still closing the distance to obliterate them, so there was no time to waste. They had a few moments before the clash at best. He had to know what was going on. Noctis glanced at the dimming moon for one more second, then turned away and sighed, conceding, "Well." A pale smile appeared on his lips.
Do you guys remember how I told you that I will take care of both Solvin and Sun Prince while you distract their armies? The sorcerer's smile grew wider, a mad glint appearing in his eyes. Change of plans, You will have to keep the prince busy for a bit too. I will try to deal with Solvin. Best of luck to you, my friends, and to me as well."
With that, he stepped out of the magical circle and gestured for Cassie to grab the oars, which she hurriedly did. A moment later, Noctis was already standing on the board of the ship, his raven black hair dancing in the wind. Sunny opened his eyes wide and screamed, "Wait! How the hell are we supposed to keep a transcendent busy?" The sorcerer threw a quick glance over his shoulder and laughed.
"I don't know. Figure something out. Try to stab him with my knife, maybe. No, stabbing that steel behemoth won't do anything."
With that, he simply took a step forward and fell down, disappearing in the darkness and the howling wind without a trace. Just like that, Noctis was gone. Sunny stared at the empty space where the sorcerer had been just a moment ago with a stunned expression. His momentary stupor was broken by Cassie's shout.
"Sunny, there are only a few seconds left. What do we do?"
The blind girl was controlling the flying ship, desperately trying to right its course so that it wouldn't take the full brunt of the Armada's siege weapons all at once. Sunny had no idea how she was able to fly the ancient vessel without being able to see, and it did not matter right now. He hesitated for a moment, then turned away and let out a resentful growl, muttering, "We follow the plan. Nothing really changed." Effie raised the dusk shard and asked, her voice grim, "What about the big bastard?" Sunny gritted his teeth and replied, "Last I checked, that monstrosity cannot fly. As long as we stay in the air, we should be fine." Cassie pushed one of the oars down, then frowned. Her voice sounded hesitant as she asked, "But how do we stop him from going after Noctis?" He looked at her, then cursed and shot back, "No idea. Shoot him with the damned bolt thrower, the big one." With that, Sunny left the blind girl behind and rushed forward. The enemy ships were already close enough for him to feel shadows dancing on their decks, which meant that it was time for him, Effie, and Kai to join the fight. A large fleet was closing in on a swift vessel, its formation in a mess because of the 14 ghastly stone abominations wreaking havoc on the flying ships. Each of the massive gargoyles bore the soul of a vile, corrupted creature, so their might and ferocity were terrifying. Not entirely on par with the original fiends that Noctis had slain, but close to it. And yet, they alone were not enough. In fact, the 14 gargoyles were merely a distraction. The main strike was yet to come. As the graceful ship came within range of the fleet's siege weapons, it dove down, and at the same time, several figures jumped off its deck into the air. A few moments later, the air was suddenly filled with the smell of blood. The captain of one of the vessels shouted something, pointing upward. Then, however, he swayed and fell down, his neck pierced by an arrow. At the same time, something fell from above. It was a young girl carrying a heavy round shield. Just above her, a man in a charred wooden mask hovered in the air, already drawing the string of his bow once again. Effie, who had been tossed down by Kai, hit the deck of the ship, slid on the dusk shard for a moment, then rolled and jumped to her feet, the runic spear in her hand glowing with an angry red light. That shine only grew brighter when the spear pierced a man's chest and was painted with crimson blood. As another awakened toppled over with a scream, struck down by an arrow. Effie twisted and shook her spear, throwing the corpse of her first victim at the rushing enemies. Her shield flashed its rim, crushing someone's chest. Then an enemy blade fell from above, landing on her shoulder, and bounced off her skin, not leaving behind even a scratch. A split second later, the attacker was already dead, and the young girl continued her slaughter, fighting like a demon released from the depths of hell, like a perfect vessel of war. There were only 2 pupils of the Red Sect left alive in the whole world. After all, one of them was Solvin, and the other was here on the ship, killing Solvin's followers one after another with a feral grin on her childish face. If warriors on the other vessels of the fleet could have seen what was happening, they would have felt lucky to be safe from the little beast and her guardian's deadly arrows. But their relief would have been misplaced, because the young warrior and the flying archer were not the only ones boarding the flying ships. Much more terrifying than them were the coming shadows. A swift figure streaked across the sky, and then a black steed landed on the deck of a flying ship, its eyes burning with crimson light. The stallion had a coat that was as black as night, 2 horns of adamantine metal and fangs that resembled those of a wolf. On its back rode a graceful knight clad in onyx armor, the scarlet blade of her odachi matching 2 ruby lights shining behind the visor of her closed helmet. Without pause, the dark rider sent her steed forward, and her sword flashed, beheading the nearest warrior of the Sun Legion in one smooth strike. The other awakened froze for a moment, suddenly grasped by a cold feeling of dread. And as fear crawled into their hearts, the terrifying crimson flames burning in the eyes of the tenebrous stallion ignited even brighter. It moved its head, biting into the neck of another soldier and tearing it wide open. More blood flowed onto the deck. On another ship, the soldiers suddenly screamed and aimed their bows up as a massive shadow suddenly covered the deck. But they were too late. As a gale of wind raised by mighty wings threw some of them off their feet, a repulsive creature crashed into the deck. It resembled a giant lion with the head of a raven, its body gaunt and entirely black. The creature had 2 powerful hind legs and 6 limbs protruding from its wide chest, each ending with a set of long talons. Lean muscles were rolling under its skin like worms, and its terrifying beak was open, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like fangs and a long tongue. Both the fangs and the tongue were of the same black color as the rest of the abominable monstrosity. Using the momentary shock of the warriors, the soul serpent, who had assumed the form of a spire messenger, reached out with its 6 arms and sliced 6 bodies apart with its talons. Blood sprayed into the air and a chilling, ghastly wail escaped from its beak. And lastly, on the stern of yet another ship, a towering devil wearing black armor simply appeared out of the shadow silently and without anyone noticing him for a split second. That 1 second was enough for a bolt of lightning to fly off his bow and hit a warrior in red armor that had been preparing to pull the lever of a ballista on the bow of the ship. Instantly, arcs of furious radiance chained to a dozen nearest soldiers, killing several, burning a few and stunning the rest. Dismissing Morgan's warbow, Sonny dashed forward and brandished the cruel sight, as well as the austere takai he held in the other 2 of his 4 hands. He knew that his time was short. Yes, Sonny was powerful, and so were his shadows. But when the defenders of the Ivory City recovered from the initial shock, they were going to show that each of them was an awakened too. And then, who knew how long he would be able to survive? The first thing to do was to cut off the head of the snake. Ramming into a tall soldier with his shoulder, Sonny sent him flying away and raised the midnight shard for a devastating downward slash. The captain of the ship, a gray-haired man with a noble face and a thick beard, reacted too fast, throwing his own sword up to block the attack. However, the takai never came down. If Sonny really wanted to attack it with it, he would have never telegraphed his strike so clearly. Instead, the cruel sight shot forward from below, piercing the captain through the chest. Infused with divine flame, it easily went through his armor and flesh, killing the man on the spot. The warmonger only had time to look at Sonny with eyes clouded by pain and smile happily. Then he fell down like a tree that had been cut down by an axe. Sonny muttered, "Damned crazies." Captain was dead, which would make things easier for Sonny. However, there were still dozens of awakened warriors on the deck of the ship, now fully aware of his presence and clamoring to spill his blood. Sonny had fought plenty of Solvin's followers in the Red Colosseum and knew very well how skilled and powerful they were. He was not sure of his ability to survive a battle against that many, especially now that he had no shadows augmenting his body. 3 of them were with Saint, Serpent, and Nightmare. And the 4th one lay on the bloody deck behind him to serve as his eyes. With the enemy possessing such a terrible numeric advantage, he judged that being aware of his surroundings would be more useful than a bit of physical might. Regardless, Sonny was not going to fight them all unless he absolutely had to. Throwing the captain's corpse out of his way with a powerful kick, Sonny dashed forward and grabbed one of the steering oars the man had been holding. He might not have known how to fly a ship, but from watching Noctis and Cassie do it, he at least knew how to crash one. As the shadow lantern appeared on his belt and devoured all light nearby, thus hiding him in a cloud of darkness and making it harder for the archers to hit him, Sonny pulled the steering oar all the way to the right. Slowly, the flying ship started to turn left, going off course and breaking formation. A few arrows zipped past Sonny, one bouncing off his helmet and throwing his head back. He could see 10 or so of the closest warmongers already running at him, and further back, even more rushing to join their comrades. Those who had been stunned by the strike of thunder were coming to their senses as well. Sonny hissed a frustrated curse under his breath. Forced to keep the oar in place and thus immobilized, he gritted his teeth and threw the cruel sight as a javelin, aiming to kill the nearest of the approaching enemies. However, his spear simply froze in the air, as if the attackers were surrounded by an invisible barrier. In the next moment, a ball of furious light invaded the cloud of darkness that protected him, dimming somewhat but not disappearing instantly. That was the problem with fighting against Awakened. Every one of them had an aspect, and each aspect was unique, making them excruciatingly unpredictable and hard to deal with. As more arrows were aimed at his head, Sonny cursed, let go of the oar, and dissolved into shadows. Left with no one to hold it in place, the steering oar returned to its natural position. But the damage was already done. Before anyone could get to it, the flying ship careened and rammed straight into the side of another one, piercing it with the metal beak of the forward ram and wedging itself deep into the Allied vessel. Both ships were heavily damaged by the collision, but the situation was still not unsalvageable. If an experienced captain acted with haste, at least one. Or maybe even both vessels could be saved. But before that could happen, a four-armed demon suddenly appeared from the shadows on the stern of the rammed ship. And a few moments later, its captain was dead too. Just like that, Sonny had doomed 2 ships and 100 souls to death with 2 strikes of his weapons. He glanced into the night sky for a moment and groaned, muttering, just 90-something or so left. Great. A muffled, mad laugh suddenly escaped from his lips.